Good evening. It's very nice to see you again. Tonight we stand where the world feels wider than it should, and colder than you remembered cold could be. You are on the edge of the Roman Empire, where the land flattens into open distances and the wind seems to come straight from the stars. The sky is a hard, pale bowl. The light is thin, as if it has to travel farther to reach you. Your breath rises and vanishes, and the air bites at the soft parts of your face, cheeks, lips, the corner of an eye like a small animal testing its teeth. Ahead, a fort sits low and stubborn against the horizon. Stone walls, timber roofs, a gate like a clenched jaw. There is the quiet clink of metal somewhere, an iron tool, a latch, a chain, simple sounds made sharp by cold. Smoke threads upward from chimneys in slow, straight lines. Because the air is so still, it doesn't even bother to stir. Before we get into the story, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. And if you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there, your little warm corner of the world, your own lamp in the dark. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, and the frost crunches under your boots with a sound like brittle paper. Somewhere beyond the fort, water moves under ice, patient and heavy. You are not in Rome, not in the sunlit heart of empire with marble and fountains and the soft chorus of courtyards. You are in a place the Romans themselves would have called a limit, a frontier, where the map becomes uncertain and the weather acts like a law. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, in the long span we often call the Pax Romana, Rome holds enormous territories, and with that size comes a practical problem. Borders, not tidy lines, but zones, rivers, forests, mountain passes, marshes, places where soldiers live for years at a time, watching, patrolling, building, repairing, waiting. In Britain, Emperor Hadrian orders a wall built around AD 122, a long stone and turf statement that the empire can draw a boundary if it chooses. In other provinces, the frontier follows rivers like the Rhine and the Danube, where fog rises off dark water and winter can lock the banks in silence. You can feel why this matters. Cold isn't just discomfort here. Cold is a force that changes everything. How you move, how you sleep, what you eat, how you store what you eat, how your body behaves when it is asked to stand still for too long. It even changes sound. Voices carry differently. Footsteps tell on you. The creak of leather seems louder, as if the air itself is listening. The fort's gate comes closer. A sentry stands in a heavy cloak, shoulders hunched, chin tucked into fabric. You can't see much of his expression, but you can read his posture. A person who has learned to conserve warmth the way you conserve water on a long walk. He shifts his weight, just a small movement, because standing still is the enemy. There are torches in brackets, their flames tight and controlled, and behind him, the passageway is darker, sheltered, a throat of stone leading into the fort's inner life. You pass through. The wind drops away, as if a door closes behind your ears. Inside, the air is different, not warm exactly, but less aggressive. The fort is a small world made of corners and routines, packed earth underfoot, wooden walkways, the smell of smoke, animal fat, damp wool, and something else, grain, perhaps, or the faint sourness of beer. You hear laughter from somewhere, not loud, but real, the kind that happens when people share hardship and decide, stubbornly, not to let it take everything. A Roman soldier's survival on frozen frontiers begins with the obvious things: walls, roofs, fire. But it also begins with the less obvious: organization. The Roman army is a machine of logistics and habit. Historians sometimes debate how standardized life really was across the empire, because conditions differ wildly from Syria to Scotland, from North Africa to the Upper Rhine. But what is clear is that the army keeps records, issues rations, builds infrastructure, and expects discipline. Those habits, boring on paper, life-saving in practice, are the first layer against winter. You walk along a street inside the fort, the kind archaeologists later call a via principalis, when it cuts through the heart of a camp. To your left and right are long buildings, barracks, each one a series of small rooms opening onto a shared space. You can imagine the shape of life inside. 8 men to a contubernium, a mess group, sharing a room and its small hearth, sharing chores and jokes, and the quiet irritation of someone always stealing the best spot near the fire. In the cold, companionship is not only emotional comfort, it is thermal physics. Bodies share heat. Shared rooms mean fewer walls, exposed to the outside. A group can keep a fire going in shifts. Someone is always awake to nudge the embers back to life. You notice how the fort feels built for function rather than beauty. The Romans can do beauty. Of course, Rome itself proves that. But here, beauty is a luxury. Here you want doors that close, roofs that shed snow, drains that keep water from pooling into ice. You want a bathhouse if you can get one, and you want an oven that works even when the wind screams. A cart creaks past you, pulled by a tired animal, mule or ox, its breath steaming. The driver's hands are wrapped, his shoulders thick with cloth. In the cart are bundles of firewood, rough cut, not pretty, but precious. Wood is time, warmth, and the ability to cook. On a frontier, wood is almost like coin. The farther north you go, the more you understand that the empire's real borders might not be walls at all, but supply, routes, roads, rivers, warehouses, contracts, and the relentless human labor that keeps food and fuel moving. The fort's central headquarters, building the Principia in the army's language, sits ahead, more solid than the barracks, with a sense of authority. Somewhere inside are records, standards, the administrative heart. Rome runs on paper and wax tablets as much as it runs on swords. You catch a glimpse of a clerk carrying something flat and rectangular, maybe a writing tablet moving quickly, as if even ink has deadlines. There is a strange calm in that thought. While winter rages, someone is still counting. Someone is still issuing. Someone is still noting that a unit received so many measures of grain, so many pairs of boots, so much salt, so much oil. It is not romantic, but it is a kind of quiet magic. The transformation of bureaucracy into survival. You turn into a sheltered corner where the wind doesn't reach. A brazier glows, and a soldier stands near it, palms extended, eyes half-lidded in relief. He doesn't look heroic. He looks human. And that is the point. These men are not marble statues. They are cold, hungry, tired, sometimes bored, sometimes afraid. Their greatness, if you want to call it that, is often the greatness of endurance, of doing the same hard thing again tomorrow. Your mind drifts outward, along the empire's vast rim. In Britain, forts line the wall and the roads that feed it. Along the Rhine and Danube, legions and auxiliary units occupy camps that become towns, and towns that become cities. In the east, the army watches different frontiers, deserts, rivers, rival empires. Each frontier has its own challenges, but winter frontiers share a particular cruelty. The cold steals energy constantly. It takes more food to stay warm, more fuel to cook, more care to keep feet and hands working, more discipline to prevent small problems from becoming tragedies. And yet this is important. Romans do not arrive helpless. They bring techniques and adapt them. They learn from local people, trade for what they need, recruit auxiliaries who know the terrain. The Roman army is famously pragmatic. If something works, it gets used. If a local cloak is warmer than an Italian one, you wear the local cloak. If a local boot style handles mud better, you adopt it. Purity of tradition matters less than staying alive and keeping the border quiet. As you move deeper into the fort, you begin to feel the rhythm of life that winter forces into place. Early chores, constant maintenance, careful storage, the repetitive tending of fire. It is like living inside a long, slow breath. Inhale, gather fuel, fetch water, grind grain, repair leather, patrol. Exhale, eat, warm, sleep, write a letter, play a game, laugh softly, listen to the wind. And somewhere above all of it, the emperor's name hangs like a distant banner. The men here may never see Rome. Some may never see Italy, but their pay, Their orders, their very presence, is tied to a capital far away, to decisions made in marble rooms with warmer air. Historians still argue about how soldiers felt about that, whether they felt pride, resentment, belonging, distance. The evidence is uneven. Official inscriptions praise the emperor. Private letters, when they survive, sound more like real people. With their complaints and longing for home, you pause near a doorway, and warm air leaks out in a thin ribbon. Inside, you hear the scrape of a bowl, the murmur of voices, the soft thud of something heavy set down, perhaps a loaf, perhaps a pot. Your stomach, as if it has been waiting for permission, remembers that hunger is also part of cold. You step closer, and the smell becomes clearer. Grain baked into bread, maybe porridge thickening in a pot, maybe a stew if supplies allow. Simple food, but steady, and steadiness is what keeps winter from becoming panic. Outside these walls, the frontier is still wild with weather. The ground is hard, the trees are bare, branches black against a pale sky. But inside, there is order, human-made, imperfect, occasionally leaky around the edges, but real. The Romans, for all their power, do not conquer winter. They negotiate with it, day by day, with wool and wood and discipline, and the quiet shared heat of people living close together. And as the night deepens over this far edge of empire, you begin to understand. Surviving the frozen frontiers is not one dramatic battle against the cold. It is 1,000 small decisions, repeated, until they become a way of life. You linger near that doorway where the warm air leaks out like a secret, and when you finally step inside, the change is so gentle you almost miss it at first, like sliding under a blanket that has been warming on the hearth. The room is not spacious. Roman forts are practical, built to house many lives inside a limited footprint, and winter makes space feel like an extravagance. The ceiling is low enough that smoke stains gather where beams meet plaster. A small hearth glows in the corner. Light comes from an oil lamp, the flame steady and watchful, throwing soft shadows over rough wood and simple gear. The air smells of wool, soot, and something faintly sour, wet leather drying too slowly. You find yourself in the familiar shape of a barracks room, one of many, lined up like the compartments of a ship, along a long building, door after door, each leading to another pocket of warmth and conversation. Archaeologists later recognized this layout in forts across the empire. The contubernia, the shared quarters of a small mess group, usually 8 men who sleep, eat, and live together, with a larger shared space in front and a sleeping area behind. The precise arrangements vary by place and time. Historians argue about details of daily life we can't always see, but the basic reality is consistent. The army lives in units of close companionship, and in winter, that closeness becomes part of the architecture's purpose. The men in this room move with the slow economy of people saving warmth. No one wastes gestures. A hand passes near the fire and lingers, then retreats. Someone lifts a cloak, shakes it once to free it of clinging frost, then hangs it where the heat might reach. Another adjusts a strap on a sandal-like boot, though out here, footwear tends to be sturdier than the light styles you might picture in sunlit Italy. The Romans are adaptable. The frontier teaches them quickly which images belong in statues and which belong on your feet. The walls are thick stone in many forts, sometimes earthworks and timber in others, and the thickness matters. It is not central heating, not comfort in the modern sense, but it is a buffer. Outside, the wind wants to strip warmth away at every instant. Inside, stone holds some of what the fire gives. Timber, too, has its own quiet, insulating patience. You run your fingertips along the wall and feel the chill it still carries. But it is a dull chill now, not the sharp cruelty of open air. You start to notice all the little ways Romans try to make winter less hungry. Roofs, for one. A good roof is a kind of peace treaty. In many provinces, soldiers use tiles where supply and tradition allow those familiar Roman shapes that overlap and channel water away. But on the far frontiers, timber and thatch appear too, because what matters is shedding rain and snow, not looking elegant. If water gets in, it becomes ice. Ice becomes damage. Damage becomes more water. Winter loves a small weakness. You look up and see how the roofline angles, how it tries to throw weather off its shoulders. You imagine men climbing up in colder months to patch leaks, to replace broken pieces, to clear heavy snow before it can sag beams. It is easy to think of Roman soldiers as always marching and fighting, but much of frontier life is maintenance, carpentry, hauling, masonry, digging, repair. Survival is not glamorous, it is work. Then there is the matter of floors. In some buildings, especially headquarters or bathhouses, Romans may build raised floors or use underfloor heating systems known as hypercausts. On the frontier, a hypercaust is a luxury and requires fuel, labor, and constant attention. Many barracks won't have it, but even without such systems, floors are managed. Packed earth that can be swept, sometimes layered with straw or rushes, sometimes simply kept as dry as possible. Dryness is another form of warmth. Damp cold is a thief that works quietly. You glance toward the doorway. Even a small gap matters. Romans used doors and shutters not as decoration but as tools. When the door opens, the room exhales heat. When it closes, the room inhales again and keeps what it can. Some forts use corridors and covered walkways to reduce exposure. Some buildings are clustered to shelter each other. The fort itself is like a ship turned inward, its walls breaking wind, its buildings forming pockets of calmer air. And then there's the simplest architecture of all, bodies. 8 men in a small space means shared warmth, shared breath, shared humidity. It isn't always pleasant. Winter dries some things, but crowded rooms can become clammy, and wet gear can sour the air. But it is survival math. A single soldier, alone in a hut, must feed his fire constantly. A group can trade shifts. One watches the embers, another sleeps, another goes out for water, another returns with wood. The warmth stays alive, because the room stays alive. Somewhere down the row, you hear a cough, just one, then silence again. The sound reminds you that winter also presses on lungs, on throats, on the thin edges of health. It's one reason the army values bathhouses and cleanliness where possible, and why letters from forts sometimes mention illness and doctors. Not every fort has the same medical resources, but the Roman army does employ medici, medical personnel, because keeping soldiers functional is a strategic necessity. A man near the hearth rubs his hands and gives you a glance that's half amusement, half resignation. The look says, yes, it's cold. Yes, we are still here. No, we don't talk about it too much because talking about it won't light the fire. You sit, and the bench beneath you is hard, but it is not frozen, and that feels like a miracle. Your eyes adjust to the lamplight. You notice personal objects, small, quiet signs that life continues. A comb, a cup, a dice set, or game pieces, perhaps, because soldiers everywhere find ways to pass time. A leather pouch tied tight, a scrap of cloth being mended with careful stitches. The empire is built by people who sew their own small repairs at night. There is a larger room at the front of the barracks, often used as a shared space, sometimes for cooking or storing gear, and behind it, the tighter sleeping area. You can picture the arrangement in forts along Hadrian's wall, where excavations have revealed the barrack blocks and their repeated compartments. On that wall in northern Britain, the cold is the kind that gets into stone and stays there, and the wind off the moors has a reputation even today. Standing here now, you understand why a Roman unit posted to that line would care about roofs, doors, and the angle of a building more than they care about speeches. Outside, the empire wants to look eternal. Inside, the empire wants to stay warm. Your thoughts drift to the larger design of the fort itself. Many Roman forts follow a recognizable plan, a rectangle with rounded corners, gates aligned with roads, headquarters centered, barracks arranged with discipline. But the frontier forces adaptation. Terrain matters. Local materials matter. Speed of construction matters. Historians still discuss how Roman the frontier sometimes looks on the ground, how much was ideal plan versus on-the-fly pragmatism. Yet that tension is itself Roman. The empire has a blueprint, and then it has reality. You walk, slowly, into an adjoining space where supplies are kept. Stacked bundles of straw, a pile of firewood, smaller pieces for quick heat, larger logs for steady burning, jars sealed with stoppers, a sack of grain tied against moisture. Everything has a place. Because disorder in winter becomes danger. Lose the flint and steel, and you spend longer lighting the fire. Let grain get wet, and you lose food to rot. Leave boots near the door, and they stiffen overnight like boards. You notice how Romans treat storage as architecture too. Raised platforms keep goods off damp ground. Containers are sealed. Areas are designated and supervised. The army is fond of lists and responsibility. Who is on duty? Who is on watch? Who is assigned to the wood detail? Who is responsible for the ration issue? It can feel heavy-handed, but on a frozen frontier, administration is compassion in a stern uniform. You think of the forts along the Rhine, where the river can be both road and barrier. When it freezes, it changes the rules. A river that once protected becomes a path. Frontier commanders have to worry about that. They patrol, they watch ice, they keep torches ready on the walls. You can almost hear the creak of ice shifting, the low moan of a river trying to stay a river. The fort is not only defensive, it is a home for people who may spend decades here. Around many forts, civilian settlements grow vichy, where traders, craftspeople, families, and all the ordinary machinery of life cluster near the army's steady demand. But inside the fort's walls, even before you step out to those civilian streets, you can feel a sort of miniature city. Cooks, clerks, smiths, medics, officers, messmates, each role part of a winter ecosystem. The hearth pops softly, and a flake of ash rises and disappears. You watch it, sleepy and fascinated, and you realize you're watching time itself. Tiny, consumed, turning into warmth and smoke, leaving behind what cannot burn. A soldier takes a piece of wood and slides it into the fire with practiced care. Not too much, not too fast. The flame brightens, then settles again. This is what winter survival looks like. Not a dramatic gesture, but a steady one. And as you sit there hearing the low murmur of voices, feeling the room hold warmth, the way cupped hands hold water, you begin to sense the fort's deeper lesson. Rome survives on frozen frontiers, not because its soldiers are made of iron, but because they build systems that cradle fragile human bodies. Walls that break wind, roofs that shed snow, rooms that cluster, fires that are tended, lists that keep supplies moving, companionship that shares heat. Historians can argue about morale, about the harshness of discipline, about whether frontier postings were dreaded or sought after, but they agree on this much. The Roman army is a machine designed to keep functioning, and winter is the test that makes its design visible. In the cold, you can see the structure behind the empire, like bones under skin. You rise again, reluctantly, because warmth makes you sleepy in a way the open air never does. The corridor outside is cooler, and you feel the difference immediately, like stepping out from under a cloak. Still, you carry the room's heat with you for a moment, stored in your chest, in your fingertips, in the quiet knowledge that even at the edge of the world, people have learned how to make a shelter out of stone, timber, and routine. And as you drift onward through the fort, the next thing you begin to notice, inevitable, unavoidable, is what you're wearing, and what everyone else is wearing, and how winter turns clothing into the first true line of defense. You move through the corridor like you're moving through layers of air, cooler here, warmer there, each doorway a small climate, each corner its own lesson, and soon your attention settles, naturally, on the simplest technology any soldier carries into winter. Cloth against skin, you look down at your own sleeves, at the way fabric gathers at the wrist, at the way a cloak falls when you pull it tighter. In warmer provinces, you might have taken clothes for granted, something you wear while the real work happens. Here, on a frozen frontier, clothing is the work. It is shelter you can walk in. Romans don't have synthetic miracle fibers, no modern fleece that dries in a blink, no glossy insulation that puffs up like a cloud. They have what the ancient world has always relied on: wool, linen, leather, and the patient art of layering. Wool is the star of this story. It is warm even when it's damp. And dampness is everywhere here: mist, sleet, condensation in crowded rooms, snow melting into cuffs. You can feel why wool matters the moment you step outside, and the cold tries to siphon heat through every seam. The fibers hold air. Air holds warmth. It's a small physics lesson you learn with your shoulders. Underneath, many soldiers wear a tunic, often wool, sometimes linen, in warmer seasons, simple, practical, dyed in various shades depending on supply and fashion. The popular imagination loves a uniform Roman red, but reality is messier. Cloth dyes vary, and what you wear depends on issue, local resources, and time period. The army supplies some garments, soldiers buy others, and the frontier adds its own improvisations. You notice that men here often look bulkier than statues suggest. The marble soldier is a summer soldier. The frontier soldier is layered. You see a man adjusting something at his neck, an extra wrap of cloth perhaps, or a scarf-like strip. Another has pulled his cloak up and pinned it to keep the wind from prying it open. The cloak itself, often described as a sagum in military contexts, is a thick woolen blanket of a thing, sometimes treated to shed water. It is both coat and bedding, the kind of object you would mourn if you lost it. Out here, a cloak isn't fashion, it's an argument against hypothermia. And then, quietly, you remember that we actually know some of this, not only from stone reliefs and texts, but from the scraps of daily life that survive in odd corners of time. At Vindolanda, a fort near Hadrian's wall, thin wooden writing tablets have been found, personal letters and lists, preserved by wet, oxygen-poor soil. They are not epic literature, they are ordinary voices, and among them are requests for things that sound almost modern in their plainness. Socks, sandals, underwear items that tell you winter was felt in toes and fingers, not just in grand strategy. The tablets don't romanticize the cold, they simply assume it and ask for help against it. You stand with that thought for a moment. A soldier, far from home, writing to someone, perhaps family, perhaps a friend asking for socks, not glory. Socks. It's a lesser-known detail in the broad sweep of Roman history, but it's widely attested, and it changes the mood of the frontier. The empire becomes intimate. The frozen border becomes a place where small comforts matter more than speeches. You move into an open yard where the air is sharper again, and you watch men at work, some repairing gear, some drilling, some hauling. Their clothing shifts as they move. When they exert themselves, they loosen layers, because sweat is dangerous in winter. Sweat soaks cloth. Wet cloth steals warmth. A soldier learns to manage heat like a careful fire. Not too much, not too little. The trick is staying warm without getting wet from your own effort. You see a man carrying a bundle of wood, cloak thrown back, tunic sleeves rolled, breath steaming hard. He looks comfortable for now, but you can also see him glance at the sky as if checking the mood of the weather. The frontier teaches you to read clouds the way you read orders. Leather comes next in this chain of survival. Belts, straps, boots, gloves, if you can get them. Leather is everywhere, and it changes. In cold, it stiffens, it cracks if neglected. You can smell the oil and fat used to condition it. Someone sits on a low stool, rubbing grease into a strap with a rag, slow and methodical, as if tending to a living thing. This is another lesson. Winter is not only cold, it is dry, and it can ruin gear quietly. Some soldiers wear trousers, braccae, especially in northern provinces, a style long associated with barbarian peoples in Roman stereotypes. In Rome's older cultural imagination, trousers are foreign, even faintly suspicious. But the frontier laughs at cultural prejudice. When the wind cuts through your tunic like a knife, you start appreciating anyone who invented pants. Over time, Roman clothing habits on the frontiers reflect this practical borrowing. Historians debate the pace and extent of such changes, how quickly the Roman look adapted, and how much varied by unit and province. But there's no serious doubt that frontier life encourages layered leg coverings and warmer styles. You can almost hear an officer, years earlier, grumbling about trousers and then quietly accepting them once his knees stop aching. There's gentle humor in that, the sort you can savor without waking yourself up. Even an empire has to admit defeat to weather. You walk past a small group mending clothes. One holds a needle, another steadies the cloth. Their fingers are quick despite the cold, because they are inside a sheltered spot, perhaps near a brazier. The stitches are not elegant, but they are tight. A tear in a cloak is a door for wind. A loose seam is a leak in your warmth. In winter, sewing is strategy. In the background, you notice a storehouse door open and close. Inside are bundles of cloth and equipment, issued in quantities that remind you again of the Roman army's administrative muscle. Soldiers receive pay stipendium, and from that, they may have deductions for food and gear, depending on period and unit. The exact accounting practices shift over centuries, and historians argue about the details of how much soldiers truly kept and how deductions worked in different eras. But the larger point remains. Clothing and equipment are tied to systems supply, contracts, manufacturing, stretching back to workshops and sheep pastures far away. A frontier fort is not isolated. It is connected by roads, river barges, and the empire's relentless appetite for order. You step closer to the men and notice how they dress for sleep. In warmer places, you might imagine sleeping lightly clothed. Here, sleep is another negotiation with cold. Cloaks double as blankets. Straw mattresses help insulate from cold ground. Men huddle closer. Some might even sleep in layers, especially on bitter nights when the fire can't be kept strong enough. The room's air grows thick with breath. Condensation forms on beams. In the morning, you might wake to find your cloak damp where it touched a cold wall. That dampness is why drying space matters. You glance at lines strung near a hearth, garments hung where warmth can reach them, but too close and they scorch, too far and they stay wet. Another small art. You notice footwear again, boots and sandals, with additional wraps, sometimes socks, and you realize that clothing is not a single item, but a system. Tunic, underlayer, cloak, leg coverings, wraps, pins, belts, all adjusted throughout the day. When you step outside, you cinch. When you work hard, you loosen. When you stop, you cover quickly, because stillness invites cold to creep in. The cold, in this sense, is not only physical, it is psychological too. It tests attention, it punishes forgetfulness. Leave your cloak unpinned, and the wind will remind you. Forget to dry your socks, and your toes will hold a grudge. Some scholars think this constant vigilance shapes frontier soldiers' mindset more cautious, more routine-bound, more attuned to small failures, though it's hard to prove directly. What we can say is that winter makes the small things larger. A gust sweeps through the yard, and everyone shifts instinctively, turning shoulders, tucking chins, pulling fabric tighter. It is like watching a school of fish respond to a shadow coordinated without discussion. Habit becomes a kind of shared intelligence. As you walk, you remember that Rome's northern frontiers are not all the same. Britain's wet, cold clings. The Upper Rhine can bring sharp freezes. The Danube's winters can be severe, with ice thick enough at times to change movement. And further north, still beyond the formal lines of empire, cold becomes a different language altogether. The Roman soldier's clothing has to speak enough of that language to keep him alive. You pause beside a rack of gear and touch a folded cloak. The wool is dense, rough, reliable. You imagine it soaked and heavy, then dried stiff, then warmed again by fire, cycle after cycle. It is not pretty. It is faithful. And as the day leans toward evening, and the fort begins to smell more strongly of smoke and cooking, you sense the next problem rising into focus. Inevitable. Once you've dressed for winter, your feet, your toes, your boots, and the quiet daily war against numbness. You keep walking, and the cold keeps trying patiently, politely to steal sensation from the lowest parts of you first. It starts as a mild dullness in the toes, a soft fading at the edges, like a song turning quieter in another room. Then it becomes something sharper, a warning, because on a frozen frontier, your feet are not just feet, they are transport, labor, patrol, survival. A A soldier can endure hunger longer than he can endure useless legs. You look down again, really look, and you begin to see how much of Roman winter life is designed around this one fact. The ground is an enemy when it is cold and wet. Roman military footwear is often described in clean textbook terms: caligae, the iconic heavy sandals with hobnails, associated especially with earlier imperial soldiers. You can almost hear the cliché, Roman sandals marching across the world. But here, on this frontier, that picture is incomplete. It's not that open footwear never appears. Roman gear is diverse and changes over time, but cold provinces force adaptation. Leather shoes, closed boots, extra layers, and improvisations become not only common, but necessary. You feel that necessity in your bones as you step onto ground that has the wrong kind of softness, mud beneath a crust of frost. Your boot sinks slightly, then resists, and you can almost sense the wet reaching upward, ambitious and cold. A soldier beside you stamps his feet not in frustration, but in maintenance. Movement pushes blood into toes. Toes are stubborn, they need persuading. You drift toward a sheltered area where men sit with their gear. One has a boot in his hands, turned so you can see the sole. There, set in patterns, are iron hobnails, little studs that bite into earth, improve traction, and make a distinctive sound on stone. Hobnails are one of those small, specific details that archaeologists recognize across the Roman world, because the nails survive even when leather rots away. They are practical, and in winter, they are also safety. Slip on an icy rampart, and the Empire doesn't care that you were brave. You'll still be injured. The man's fingers are dark with grease. He rubs the leather, kneading it as if it were dough, working oil into stiff places to keep the material supple. Leather is skin, after all once alive, now asked to keep another living body safe. Cold can make it crack. Wet can make it rot. A boot is a frontier relationship. You have to tend it, and it will carry you. Nearby, another soldier unwraps strips of cloth from his feet, foot wraps carefully peeling them away. The cloth is damp, and when it comes off, a sharp smell of sweat and leather rises briefly, then fades into the smoky air. He massages his toes as if counting them, checking that each one still belongs to him. Then he sets the wraps near a heat source, close enough to warm, far enough not to scorch. This quiet foot care is one of the true daily rituals of survival. Not heroic, not sung about, but as essential as a sword. You remember, hazily, that from Vindolanda, again, that frontier fort near Hadrian's wall, we have those thin wooden tablets, and among their ordinary messages are requests for socks and shoes. It is one of the most human windows we have into the Roman frontier, the army's great machine, reduced to a person asking for warm feet, not because the Romans were ill-prepared, but because winter is endlessly demanding. Even a well-supplied fort can run short. Even a disciplined soldier can need help. Even empire can't knit socks fast enough for every cold snap. And Vindolanda isn't only letters. Archaeologists there have found an astonishing range of everyday objects preserved by the soils: wet conditions, leather shoes, bits of clothing, tools, fragments that make the frontier feel close enough to touch. When you picture the Romans in winter now, it's not marble figures, it's leather, mud, wool, steam, and hands working by lamplight. You watch another soldier repairing a strap. He pulls it tight, punches a hole, threads it through a buckle with slow confidence. You can tell he has done this 100 times. There is a rhythm to frontier repairs. Gear wears out faster in cold and wet. Marching through slush is not the same as marching through dust. You imagine what a long patrol feels like, when the ground is hard and the air is dry, the cold numbing the front of your face while your feet sweat inside their layers. It's a strange contradiction. Your body is working, generating heat, but the environment is constantly siphoning it away. Too many layers, and you sweat. Sweat becomes dampness. Dampness becomes cold. Too few layers, and you lose heat faster than you can make it. Winter turns clothing and footwear into a balancing act, performed all day, every day. Some forts, especially those on busy frontiers, have workshops fabricae, where equipment is made or repaired, or at least spaces where specialists work. Cobblers, smiths, leatherworkers. Not every fort is the same, and the archaeological evidence varies by site and period. But the Roman military system clearly relies on skilled craftspeople close at hand. The frontier is too far from the heartland to treat every broken boot as a shipment problem. Sometimes you fix it where you stand. You step closer to a small pile of discarded nails and worn leather scraps. It's a quiet archaeological prophecy. Centuries from now, these small things will outlast names. Emperors will blur. Borders will shift. But an iron hobnail, stubborn, simple, will still be there for someone to find. A soldier laughs softly at something set off to the side. It's a short laugh, warm, like steam. He lifts his foot and points with his toe at the boot of a friend, where a seam has been stitched too crudely. The thread, thick and uneven. Looks like a horse did that, his face says, even if you don't catch the exact words. Gentle humor is also insulation. It keeps morale from freezing. You remember that the Roman army is not made only of men from Italy. It recruits auxiliaries from across the empire and beyond. And those men bring their own practices, different clothing styles, different ways of handling cold, different ideas about what matters in winter. Over time, the borderlands become a blend of habits. Historians still debate the texture of that blending, how it differed by province, how quickly fashions changed, how much was official issue versus local purchase, but the evidence for adaptation is strong. Rome's strength is often its willingness to borrow. You notice someone rubbing something onto his feet before rewrapping them, perhaps oil or fat, a barrier against moisture and chafing. You can't be sure exactly what every soldier uses, and it likely varies by availability and personal habit, but the general practice of protecting skin against friction, damp, cracking, makes sense in any cold camp. Chafed skin becomes blistered skin. Blistered skin becomes infection. Infection becomes time off duty. And on a frontier, time off duty is both a personal risk and a unit's burden. You think about frostbite, not as a dramatic, cinematic injury, but as a creeping hazard. Ancient writers don't always give us clinical descriptions in the way modern medicine would, but they do describe the hardships of winter campaigns. Limbs numbed, soldiers weakened, weather as a silent attacker. Even without a precise medical vocabulary, the lived reality is obvious. Cold damages the body, and the body has limits. So the Romans fight back with routine. They keep spare wraps dry when possible. They rotate socks and cloth. They warm themselves near fires not only for comfort, but to restore feeling. They stamp and pace on watch. They avoid standing still on bare stone. They learn to shift weight and keep blood moving. You see it on the ramparts as evening approaches. A sentry doesn't stand like a statue. He sways, paces a step or two, returns, checks the line, then paces again. His cloak is pinned tight. His boots are planted carefully, feeling for slickness. His breath is a pale cloud, and the cold tries to climb into his ankles. He refuses it with movement. As you walk along the inside of the wall, you feel how the fort's surfaces change underfoot, packed earth to stone to wood. Each texture has its own cold. Stone drains warmth quickly. Wood feels kinder, not warm but less hungry. Earth holds damp. The fort is a patchwork of these realities, and your feet read them the way your eyes read light. There is another quiet truth about footwear on the frontier. It marks status and supply. Some men have better boots than others. Some have newer leather, better stitching, thicker soles. That can come from official issue, from purchase, from connections, from luck. The Roman army is an institution, but it is also made of people, and people are unequal even under the same standards. Historians argue about how fairness and supply actually felt at the ground level, how often shortages hit, how corruption or favoritism played out, how much personal spending filled the gaps. We can't reconstruct every complaint, but the very existence of personal letters and supply lists suggests that gaps existed, and men noticed them. You pause at a doorway, where warmth spills out again. Inside, someone is drying boots near a hearth, turning them slowly so the heat reaches evenly. Too much heat can shrink or crack leather. Too little leaves it wet and stiff. The patience required is almost meditative. This is another form of Roman discipline, not only drilling with weapons, but drilling the mind to keep doing small, careful things. The wind outside rises, and you feel it press against the fort's walls. Somewhere, a shutter rattles, a torch flares, then steadies. The night is coming, and with it, the cold deepens, thickening like ink in water. You realize your attention is shifting again from your feet upward, toward the fort's most constant hunger. Fuel, because boots and socks keep you alive one step at a time, but fire keeps the entire place breathing. And tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, someone must go out into the cold to bring that breathing back inside. You step back into the open air, and the cold greets you like an old acquaintance, familiar, persistent, and faintly smug. It doesn't shout, it simply waits, knowing that every moment outside is a negotiation you pay for with heat. And almost immediately, you notice the fort's deepest appetite: fire. Not the dramatic bonfire of a festival, but the daily, disciplined flame that keeps fingers usable, keeps soup simmering, keeps wet socks from becoming stiff boards. Fire is not a comfort here. Fire is infrastructure. The fort runs on it the way a modern city runs on electricity, except the power lines are human backs, carts, and axe blades. You follow the sound of labor wood knocking against wood, the scrape of a sled runner, the grunt of men working in cold air. Near the gate, a small detail is assembling. Soldiers, perhaps assisted by camp followers or hired labor when available, preparing to go out for fuel. Their cloaks are pinned, their boots are tightened, their faces are set in the quiet seriousness of people about to do something unpleasant but necessary. A man checks an axe head, running his thumb along the edge not to test sharpness by drama, but by habit. Another tightens a rope around a bundle of kindling. Someone lifts a wicker basket that will be filled with smaller sticks, quick-start fuel that catches easily. Bigger logs are for steady heat later. You can tell, just from the way they sort it, that they've learned the rhythm of fire. Spark, flame, ember, ash. Outside the walls, the landscape offers fuel forests, brush, deadfall, but it also hides dangers. Slippery ground, sudden weather changes, the possibility of hostile encounters, and the simple risk of getting lost when snow flattens landmarks. Winter makes even a short trip into a small expedition. You pass through the gate with them, and the wind immediately grabs at your cloak as if trying to peel you open. The fort recedes behind you, solid and dark, while ahead the trees stand bare, their branches scribbling against a pale sky. The air smells clean and sharp, like iron and distant smoke. Here is another truth about the Roman frontier. The fort is never truly self-sufficient. It must draw on the countryside around it. Firewood has to come from somewhere, and in many regions, wood becomes a strategic material. It is hauled for cooking and warmth, yes, but also for building repairs, for palisades, for scaffolding, for carts, for tool handles. An army stationed for years will consume forests as surely as it consumes grain. You walk with the wood detail along a packed track that leads away from the fort toward managed woodland. The Romans are road builders, and even on the frontier, they carve routes that carts can use, because moving wood by hand is slow misery. Still, the final work is always human. Cutting, bundling, loading, lifting. You hear the first axe strikes heavy. Regular thunk, thunk, thunk as a tree yields. The sound is surprisingly comforting in its rhythm, like a heartbeat of industry. Chips fly, pale against dark bark. Breath clouds around the men's faces. Someone pauses to flex fingers, then swings again. It's slow work, made slower by cold. Wood, that might split easily in summer, can behave differently now. Gloves, if you have them, make grip clumsy. Bare hands numb too quickly. Men trade off, because fatigue in winter is a trap. Tired bodies make mistakes, and mistakes in the cold can linger. Once branches are cut and trunks sectioned, the hauling begins. You watch a sled, simple, low, dragged over packed snow and frozen ground. Where the snow is thin, the runners scrape and squeal. Where the ground softens into mud, The sled fights back. Heavy and reluctant, the men lean into ropes, shoulders forward, boots digging for traction. And as you watch, you understand how fire turns into a chain of obligations. Not one task, but many. Cut the wood, dry the wood, store the wood, guard the wood, distribute the wood, tend the fire, clean the ash, repair the hearth. Repeat. Inside the fort, wood is measured and monitored because it disappears quickly. A fort cannot afford to burn through its stockpile in a fit of luxury. Even warmth has to be rationed in a way that feels faintly unfair on the coldest nights. Someone, some officer, some quartermaster, has to decide how much fuel the bathhouse gets, how much the kitchens get, how much the barracks get, how much the headquarters gets. The Roman army loves hierarchy, and winter gives it endless chances to practice. You return toward the fort with a load that feels heavier than it looks, because cold makes everything feel denser. Your shoulders ache in a steady, sleepy way. The fort's walls come closer, and the sight of them is almost emotional, like seeing a harbour after rough water. Inside, the wood is stacked in orderly piles, sheltered as best as possible. Dry fuel is the goal. Wet fuel smokes, burns poorly, and fills rooms with eye-watering haze. So storage matters. Raised platforms, covered sheds, careful rotation, older wood used first, newer wood dried longer. It's the kind of system that would bore you on a warm day and save you on a cold one. And wood is not the only fuel in the Roman world. You catch the smell of charcoal different from raw wood smoke, cleaner, sharper. Charcoal is wood transformed, burned in low oxygen to become a dense, hot-burning fuel that's especially useful for braziers and metalwork. Producing it takes planning. You need controlled burns, time, and skill. On some frontiers, charcoal production becomes part of the local economy because the army's need is constant. It's one of those quietly important details. Not every flame in a fort is fed by a fresh log. Some are fed by a fuel already refined by patience. You wander near a workshop area where a smith's space breathes heat. The glow from a forge is a different kind of warmth, focused, fierce, contained. The smith doesn't simply make weapons. He keeps the fort's body intact. Nails, fittings, hinges, buckles, tools. In winter, metal grows bitter to the touch. A cold blade can numb your palm in seconds. So metalwork is both necessary and uncomfortable, and it drinks charcoal like a thirsty animal. You also notice that not all fuel is wood. In some parts of the empire, especially where forests are scarce, people burn peat or dried dung, or use brush and reeds, anything that will give heat. On the colder northern frontiers, wood is often available, but not infinite. And local conditions matter. The Romans adapt to what the landscape offers, and that adaptation can strain relationships with local communities who also need fuel to survive. You can sense that tension without anyone spelling it out. A fort's demand is immense. The civilian settlement nearby needs wood too. Farmers need fuel. Craftspeople need fuel. If the army claims too much woodland, resentment grows like frost on a window, thin at first, then thick. Historians still argue about how often environmental pressure and resource competition contributed to frontier instability. It's difficult to measure precisely, and every region is different, but the basic logic is unavoidable. Armies consume. Winter increases consumption. A frontier garrison, over years and decades, changes landscapes. You step into a barracks room again as evening settles, and you watch the fire being managed with careful restraint. Someone feeds it small pieces first, then a larger log once the flame is stable. Another person nudges coals into a tighter pile to keep them hot longer. A clay or metal brazier glows nearby, its heat gentler but steady. The men are not careless with fire, they respect it. Fire is life, but it is also danger. A spark can catch straw. Smoke can choke a room. The fort's walls keep out wind, but they also keep in what you burn. So there are routines even for the ash. Someone scoops it out, carries it to a designated place. Ash can be used practically mixed into cleaning solutions. spread on slippery ground for traction, though not every soldier is thinking in neat categories like that. Mostly, they're thinking, keep the hearth working, keep the room breathable, keep the night survivable. Outside, the sky darkens into a deep blue black. The wind returns, rattling shutters, whispering around corners. The fort answers with smoke rising straight from chimneys, with lamps winking on in windows, with the soft glow of controlled heat. You sit near the hearth again, listening to the crackle, feeling the heat on your face and the coolness at your back. It's a strange split sensation, like being warmed on one side by the past and cooled on the other by the reality of night. And as the fire settles into a bed of coals, steady, dependable, you realize the next question. Winter asks, as sure as hunger, what do you eat when the world is frozen? And how do you keep that food coming, day after day, without panic? The fire has settled into its steady, trustworthy phase. Less dancing flame now, more patient ember, and in that calmer light, your mind drifts, as minds do near warmth, toward the next daily certainty. Food, not feasts, not banquet poetry, just the solid, repetitive comfort of grain. You follow the smell first. It threads through the fort in a way smoke does, quiet, persuasive, warming the imagination before it warms the body. There's a sweetness to it, a toasted edge, the promise of something that will sit heavy in your stomach and keep you from shivering quite so hard. You pass along the main street and turn into an area where work never truly stops, because hunger never truly stops. Here is the fort's bakery space, sometimes a dedicated building, sometimes ovens attached to kitchens, depending on the site and the period. The Romans are not shy about building for food. In many forts, archaeologists find the evidence: ovens, ash pits, grinding stones, flour dust, trapped in corners of history. The army needs calories in bulk, and grain is the most reliable way to carry sunlight through winter. You step inside and feel the heat immediately, not the gentle hearth heat of a barrack room, but the thicker, more enveloping warmth of ovens that have been worked hard. The air is dry. Flour hangs in it like a pale fog, catching lamplight. You taste it faintly when you breathe chalky, harmless, familiar. A soldier, or perhaps a specialist assigned to this task, tips grain into a mill. In some places, it's a larger rotary quern. In others, it might be smaller hand mills, depending on what's been built and what's available. The sound is steady, stone on stone, a gritty, circular sigh. Someone else gathers the flour, rubbing it between fingers to judge fineness. In winter, everything is about judgment: how much fuel you can spare, how damp the air is, how long something will keep. You watch the dough being made with practiced efficiency: water, flour, maybe a bit of salt. The exact recipes vary, and they vary even more by province and supply. But the pattern is consistent. Grain becomes flour, flour becomes dough, dough becomes bread. That transformation is the fort's daily alchemy. The historical anchor holds firm in your mind. This is the Roman army in the High Empire, the world of forts and walls and river frontiers, the kind of garrison life that becomes especially visible in places like 2nd century Britain along Hadrian's wall. We know from archaeology and surviving documents that these frontier communities are organized around predictable provision stores, ovens, ration issues, because unpredictability is what kills you when winter closes roads and storms blur tracks. You drift toward a granary, one of those purposeful Roman buildings, often raised on stone or wooden supports so air can circulate beneath, keeping grain drier and less inviting to pests. The doors are thick. The structure smells of old straw and dust and stored summer. There is a particular comfort in that smell. It is the scent of preparation. Inside, the stacks are orderly, sacks or bins, measures and scoops. A clerk or quartermaster figure keeps track of what goes out and what remains. Rome runs on grain in more ways than one. In the city of Rome, the grain supply is a political heartbeat. On the frontier, it's a literal heartbeat. If the grain doesn't arrive, morale falls, bodies weaken, discipline frays. A fort without food is a fort that begins to leak people into the landscape. You can almost feel the empire's roads under this granary floor, the long lines of carts and barges and contracts that make stored wheat possible here. So far from Italy's softer winters, how much is delivered by official channels? How much is purchased locally? How much is supplemented by trade and opportunism? Historians still debate the balance in different provinces and periods. The Roman military is certainly supplied at scale, but frontiers are messy places. Local harvests fail, shipments delay, units improvise. The truth is likely a blend: state provision, regional supply, and the everyday creativity of people who refuse to starve. Outside the granary, the baking continues. You watch loaves shaped quickly, not with an artist's pride, but with a worker's speed. The oven mouth glows orange. A peel slides a flattened round into the heat. For a moment, the dough looks pale and vulnerable, like something that shouldn't survive in such a fierce place. Then it begins to change, surface drying, crust forming, color deepening. If your mind wanders briefly to Pompeii, far from this frozen frontier, you remember how carbonized loaves from the eruption of 79 CE preserve even the scoring marks on bread. It's an odd connection: a warm Italian town frozen in ash, and a cold frontier fort warmed by ovens. But it reminds you that bread is a Roman constant across climates. Only here, bread is less about pleasure and more about endurance. A bowl of porridge sits nearby, grain boiled into something thick and steaming, easier to make in large quantities, easy to digest, easy to warm hands around. Ancient sources describe soldiers eating simple staples, and while individual diets vary, it's hard to imagine winter garrisons without some form of boiled grain. It's food that feels like a blanket from the inside. Someone lifts a loaf out and taps it, listening for the hollow sound that means it's done. The sound is small, satisfying. A loaf cools on a board, sending out a scent that seems to soften the harsh edges of the fort. You notice the way the men's expressions change around food. Even the most disciplined posture relaxes slightly when bread is near. In winter, your body is always spending energy to stay warm. You feel that expenditure as a quiet emptiness in the chest. Bread fills that emptiness in a way that feels almost moral, like the world is briefly fair again. Rations are issued with routine. A line forms, not chaotic, not rushed. Romans are good at lines. When the system is working, each man receives his portion. There may be complaints, of course, because humans are humans, and winter makes everyone more opinionated. Someone will claim his share is smaller. Someone will insist the flour is coarser than last week. Someone will say, with the weary certainty of a veteran, that in the old days the bread was better, even if he has been saying that for 10 years. You catch a glimpse of a list being checked, names, quantities, notes. It echoes those Vindolanda tablets you've been carrying in your mind, the written texture of frontier life. So mundane, it becomes precious to historians. The empire's vastness is held together by the daily practice of counting what people need. There is another subtle detail you begin to appreciate. Grain isn't just about eating, it's also about time. Bread can be carried. Hard bread can last longer. Porridge must be eaten relatively quickly. Flour can spoil if damp. Whole grain stores better, but requires milling. Each choice is a choice about labor and storage and risk. So winter pushes the fort into habits. Bake regularly, store carefully, keep the ovens maintained, guard against moisture. Someone scrapes ash out and spreads it where the ground is slick. Someone checks the ovens, stonework for cracks. Someone carries water in, careful not to spill, and create an icy patch where people will trip. You take your portion simple, warm enough to steam faintly, and as you eat, the bread's plainness becomes its comfort. It tastes like work rewarded. It tastes like tomorrow will be possible. And you sense, under that comfort, a deeper truth. Rome's power often looks like legions and emperors in history books, but on frozen frontiers it also looks like grain moved across long distances, stored in raised granaries, turned into bread by tired hands. Some scholars argue that this logistical capacity, this ability to feed large standing forces far from the Mediterranean core, is one of the empire's most important strengths. Others caution that it could be fragile, dependent on good harvests, stable routes, and honest officials. Both things can be true at once. An empire can be impressive and vulnerable in the same breath. You finish the last bite and feel it settle in you like a small stone of warmth. Outside, the wind continues its patient work against the walls. But inside, for a little while, you are fed. The fire has fuel. The bread has weight. And you begin to notice another, quieter winter practice forming around the edges of the kitchen barrels. Salt, and the long art of making food last when the world outside refuses to cooperate. The bread sits in you like a calm promise, and in that calm, your attention sharpens to what bread alone cannot solve. Time. Winter stretches time. It lengthens nights, slows roads, freezes rivers into new shapes, and turns fresh food into something uncertain. So the fort answers with an older kind of certainty, preservation, quiet methods that let summer's abundance survive into months when nothing wants to grow. You follow the movement of barrels. They are everywhere once you begin to notice them. Stacked along sheltered walls, rolled with grunts across packed earth, tapped and resealed with practiced hands. A barrel is a portable pantry, a small wooden world that keeps air out and order in. And in a Roman frontier fort, barrels speak of meat. Not the glossy roast of a banquet, but the plain soldiers. Meat, often pork, sometimes beef, occasionally other animals depending on region, and supply kept in forms that can endure. Salted, smoked, dried, packed in brine, rendered into fat. You step into a storage area and feel the air change. Cooler here, damp with the scent of wood and salt. The smell is distinctive, sharp, mineral, slightly metallic, like the sea even when you're far from it. Salt is one of the ancient world's quiet powers. It doesn't look like much. It doesn't sparkle in the dark, but it arrests decay. And on a frozen frontier, that's as valuable as any fortification. A man lifts the lid of a container carefully, as if opening a chest of coins, and you glimpse pale slabs of preserved meat. Not appetizing in the way fresh food is, but deeply reassuring. It means planning happened. It means someone, months ago, thought ahead. The Roman army's provisioning is complex and varies by time and place, and historians continue to debate the precise balance between state-issued rations, local purchase, and private supplementation. But preserved meat appears again and again in the evidence as a practical necessity. An army cannot rely only on hunting or fresh slaughter in winter. It needs stores. You think of the term anana militaris, often associated with the organized supply of food for the army, especially as the empire evolves. The exact systems shift across centuries, and the details can get technical, but the principle is clear. Feeding soldiers is an administrative priority. On frontiers, that priority becomes tangible in salt, smoke, and barrels. You watch the mechanics of it. Salt is rubbed into cuts of meat, drawn into crevices, worked over the surface until it looks almost snowy. In some methods, meat is packed in salt, layered, and weighted. In others, brine salt water does the work. Smoking adds another barrier, drying and flavoring at once. Though smoke requires fuel and controlled conditions, drying depends on air and season. Everything is a dance with moisture, because moisture is decay's best friend. A soldier, perhaps a designated cook or helper, checks a hanging strip of meat near a smoke-darkened beam. He presses it, listens to its firmness, smells it. This is sensory knowledge, passed by practice more than by written rule. Roman texts talk about food and agriculture, but the frontier's daily expertise lives in hands and noses. You step outside into the cold again, and notice how the air itself assists preservation. In many climates, winter becomes a natural pantry. Cold slows spoilage. Ice can keep things longer, but it's not a perfect solution. Thaws happen, damp happens, rodents happen, so the fort stores must be managed constantly. You pass by a place where bones are being trimmed from a joint, and you realize that preservation also means waste is minimized. Fat is rendered. Bones become broth. Broth becomes warmth and calories. In a cold place, nothing edible feels trivial. Even the thin sheen of grease in a pot matters, because fat carries energy, and energy becomes heat. You can almost feel the Roman army's practical mind at work. If you can't make the winter shorter, you make your supplies last longer. There's a certain quiet companionship in preserved food too. It binds the fort across time. Someone salted this meat when the days were longer. Someone cut and packed it with hands that might now be pulling a cloak tighter against the wind. The same people who endured summer's insects and mud now endure winter's numbness, and the work of one season feeds the next. You drift toward the kitchens again, where the preserved meat will be turned into something more comforting. Salted pork might be boiled with grain. Smoked meat might flavor a pot that serves many. The strong salt taste is softened by water and bulked by porridge. The final dish is not fancy, but it is warm, and it is shared. And sharing matters. Roman soldiers often eat within their small groups, the contubernium, pooling some resources, cooking together, negotiating little trades. I'll take your extra bread today if you let me have more meat tomorrow. The formal ration system meets informal human behavior, and winter encourages cooperation because individualism is inefficient when you're cold. You watch a pot simmer, steam rises, carrying the scent of salt and meat into the room. Someone stirs slowly, scraping the bottom to keep it from sticking. The movement is hypnotic. A spoon taps the side. The sound is gentle, domestic in a place built for war. This is another small truth. The frontier fort, for all its weapons and orders, is also a household. You glance toward a corner where vegetables might be stored, roots, perhaps, if available, or dried legumes, depending on supply. Fresh greens are scarce in winter. Soldiers likely rely on what can be stored and what can be bought from nearby civilian settlements. The exact mix varies widely. In some places, local trade can provide additional food. In others, the environment limits variety. Historians caution against imagining one uniform Roman soldier diet because empire means diversity. But staples grain, preserved foods, whatever local produce can be stored repeat with stubborn regularity. You notice a man chewing thoughtfully on something and offering a piece to a friend. It might be dried fruit, or a nut, or simply a hard bit of bread. It's difficult to be certain without inventing details, and you refuse to invent. You stay with what is solid. Preserved foods exist, salted meat exists, and the need for them is obvious. Outside, the fort's perimeter is quiet. Snow or frost reflects faint starlight. The guards' footsteps crunch. The night feels vast. But inside, in these rooms, barrels and salt and smoke turn time into something manageable. There is an interpretive thought that comes softly, like a heavier blanket settling. Winter survival is as much about psychology as it is about calories. Preserved food creates a sense of control. It tells the body and the mind that you will not be surprised by hunger. Some historians argue that this predictability is a crucial part of military discipline. Men endure hardship better when they know there is food at the end of the day, even if it's plain. Others point out that shortages and corruption could still undermine that trust. The frontier is a place of systems, yes, but systems can falter, and you begin to sense that water and drink are the next fragile link, because salt and preserved meat make you thirst. Cold makes you forget to drink until you're suddenly dizzy. Rivers freeze, wells chill. Bad water can sicken a fort faster than a skirmish. So as the last of the stew is ladled out, as the barrels are resealed and the salt smell lingers in your hair and cloak, you find yourself listening for the sound of liquid poured, carried, trusted, wondering what a Roman soldier reaches for when the frontier is frozen and thirst arrives quietly, as if it doesn't want to be noticed. Thirst arrives in winter with a strange disguise. In summer, your body announces it loudly: dry mouth, heat on the tongue, the craving for coolness. In winter, thirst hides behind cold air and numb lips. You can go hours without noticing you need water, and then suddenly your head feels light, your thoughts slow, your hands clumsier than they should be. On a frontier, clumsy is not a charming personality trait. It's a risk, so you watch closely now for what people drink. You step into a kitchen area where steam rises from pots, and you hear it the low, familiar sound of liquid being poured into cups. Not with ceremony, with routine. The drink is warm enough to fog the rim of the vessel. Someone wraps both hands around it, not only to drink, but to borrow heat. Water is the base of everything, and it is also the most complicated. On a frozen frontier, streams can be locked under ice, rivers can be choked with slush, wells can freeze at the surface, snow can be melted, but that takes fuel, and fuel is labor. And water isn't only hard to get, it can be dangerous if it's contaminated. The Roman world understands this in an uneven but real way. Ancient writers, medical authors especially, often discuss water quality and its effects on health, even if their explanations differ from modern germ theory. Practical experience teaches the same lesson. Bad water makes men sick, and sickness makes the fort weak. So forts choose water sources carefully. They dig wells where possible. They collect from springs. They build channels and drains to manage runoff. In many Roman sites, you can still see the importance of water management in the engineering. Ditches, culverts, careful gradients. The army is famously skilled at building camps quickly, and even temporary camps often include ditches and organized water access, because a careless water source can sabotage an entire operation. You walk past a water point inside the fort, perhaps a well or a storage container kept in a sheltered place, and you notice that the water is not icy, not warm, but not ice. That means someone is thinking ahead, keeping water in a spot that won't freeze solid, bringing it in regularly, perhaps covering it. Winter turns a basic need into a small daily project, but water is not always drunk plain. You notice the smell of something fermented, soft, grainy, faintly sweet and sour at once. Beer. In the Roman world, wine is culturally prestigious, associated with Mediterranean identity. But on the northern frontiers, beer is common and practical, often made from barley or other grains, depending on local traditions. Romans sometimes joke about beer in their writing, treating it as a provincial drink. Yet the frontier doesn't care about jokes. It cares about calories, hydration, and what can be produced locally when wine shipments are delayed or expensive. In many provinces, soldiers likely drink a mix: water when available and safe, wine when issued or purchased, beer when local supply makes it abundant. The exact proportions vary by region and period, and historians are cautious about making one pattern universal. But it is widely accepted that northern communities, Rome's neighbours and subjects, had strong brewing traditions, and the Roman army, pragmatic as ever, participates. You watch a cup being lifted, the liquid dark and cloudy. Someone takes a sip and exhales, eyes half closing in relief. The warmth is small but meaningful, and there's another quiet advantage. Alcoholic drinks can be safer than untreated water if fermentation and storage reduce certain risks. The Romans don't frame it in modern microbiological terms, but many pre-modern societies learn, by experience, that some beverages are trustworthy when water is suspect. You also notice something else: vinegar. The Roman army is often associated with a drink called posca water, mixed with vinegar, sometimes flavoured, a sour, practical beverage. It appears in Roman sources and later traditions as a common soldier's drink. It's not luxurious. It's the opposite. But it makes sense. Vinegar can mask unpleasant water taste, and its acidity may reduce some risks, while also making the drink more palatable for men working hard. Again, the Romans might not explain it the way modern science would, but the practice fits the frontier's logic. Make water drinkable. Make it last. Make it part of routine. You lift a cup yourself, sour on the tongue, bracing, and you can almost feel it wake your mouth. A small shock of flavour in a world of bland winter air. It's oddly comforting, like a sharp word spoken by a friend when you're starting to drift. There's also the matter of heat. Warm drinks are not only pleasant, they're strategic. Hot water can be made by the same fire that cooks food. Warm liquid keeps you from losing as much body heat as cold water would. It's a small consideration, but winter is made of small considerations. You move toward the fort's bathhouse area, not entering yet, just lingering near where pipes and drains suggest more elaborate water use, even without describing the bathhouse fully, because that belongs to the next beat of the story. You can sense that water is the fort's bloodstream. To heat it, to move it, to drain it away, to keep it clean enough, is a daily engineering triumph. Outside the fort, the civilian settlement nearby likely provides additional drink options. Traders bring wine in amphorae, local brewers supply beer. The fort's economy and the vicus economy interlock. Soldiers spend, pay, on small comforts, and drink careful, social. Warming becomes one of those comforts, not as a glamorous intoxication, but as a way to feel human at the end of a cold day. You listen to the sound of laughter in a room where men share cups. It's gentle laughter, muffled by walls, the kind that says, "We are still here, and we still know how to enjoy a moment." Winter can make people either quiet or strangely talkative. Both are ways of keeping the mind warm. And yet, even with beer and wine and posca, water remains a risk. Ice can crack containers, barrels can leak, wells can be compromised. A sudden thaw can flood latrines and contaminate areas. Roman forts have latrine systems and drainage, but they are not modern sanitary facilities. They require constant upkeep. The smell of waste kept at a distance but never absent reminds you that managing water is also managing what you don't want near your water. This is where historians tend to argue in careful tones. Some emphasize Roman engineering achievements, aqueducts, sewers, baths, and point to the army's organizational skill in managing water even in difficult environments. Others caution that disease and sanitation problems were persistent, that crowded living conditions and imperfect waste management could lead to outbreaks. Both perspectives are credible, and the reality likely differs by fort, season, and luck. The frontier is not one story. It is many small stories of success and failure. You step outside again and feel the cold press against your lips. The cup's warmth fades quickly, but you carry the drink's steadiness inside you, and you understand why the fort's routines around water and drink matter so much. In winter, hydration is a hidden foundation. Without it, food doesn't help as much. Warmth doesn't heal as well. Endurance becomes thinner. As night deepens, a soldier passes you, carrying a bucket, the water surface trembling with each step. He moves carefully, because a spill is not only waste, it can become ice, and ice becomes danger underfoot. Even here, even now, water demands attention, and as you watch him disappear into a doorway, you begin to feel the pull of a different kind of water, heated, steamy, controlled. The bathhouse that turns cold evenings into something almost luxurious, almost civilized, and deeply Roman. You follow the promise of warmth the way a sleepy person follows a faint light in a dark hallway, without thinking too hard, just trusting that it leads somewhere gentler. The bathhouse sits like a breathing creature at the edge of the fort's daily grind. Even before you step inside, you can sense it. The heavier warmth in the air, the smell of damp stone, the thin ribbon of steam that escapes whenever a door opens. Outside, the night is cold enough to make your eyelashes feel brittle. Inside, the bathhouse offers a different season entirely. You push through the doorway, and immediately your skin registers the change. The cold that had been clinging to you loosens, reluctant to let go. The air is thick with humidity, and it carries sounds differently. Voices soften, footsteps dull, water murmurs. Oil lamps glow in alcoves, their light reflected in wet stone like small, steady moons. This is one of the most Roman things a frontier can contain. In Britain, along Hadrian's wall and its forts, bathhouses have been found in various forms, sometimes inside the fort, sometimes just outside, connected by paths that must have been bracing to cross in winter. Along the Rhine and Danube frontiers too, baths appear as part of military life when resources allow. The presence of a bathhouse isn't guaranteed everywhere. Frontiers vary, budgets vary, fuel varies. But where it exists, It becomes more than a place to wash. It becomes morale. You can stand inside. You enter the changing room, the apoditerium, where benches line the walls. Men sit shoulder to shoulder, unpinning cloaks, loosening belts, letting heavy wool fall away. You notice the quiet ritual of it. Wet boots set aside, socks unwrapped, tunics lifted over tired shoulders. The room smells of damp wool and skin, and the faint tang of vinegar and oil human life, condensed by winter layers. There's an easy, drowsy humor here too. Someone makes a comment about how his feet look like they belong to a corpse, said lightly, without gore. More like a complaint about numbness than anything dark. Another replies with the kind of teasing that only works among people who have stood guard in the same wind. You move with them into a warmer chamber, and the bathhouse begins to unfold like a lesson in controlled heat. You feel it under your soles first. The floor is not simply warm, it is evenly warm, a gentle rising warmth that seems to come from the building itself. This is the Roman hypocaust system in action, one of those engineering ideas that sounds almost magical until you see the labor behind it. Beneath the floor, hot air circulates through a space supported by small pillars, often stacks of tiles, carrying heat from a furnace room where someone feeds the fire like a patient, underappreciated priest. The heat also travels up through hollow spaces in walls, sometimes via box-like tiles, so the warmth isn't just under you, but around you. Stone that would otherwise be cold and hungry becomes a slow radiator of comfort. You can't help thinking of the fuel detail you followed earlier. The bathhouse drinks wood the way a thirsty man drinks in winter. Quickly, constantly, without apology. Every warm floorboard and steamy room is paid for by chopped trees, hauled bundles, charcoal made in careful burns. Even luxury, here, is a form of labor. You drift toward the tepidarium, the warm room where the air is mild enough to relax you without making you dizzy. It's a space for easing in, for letting muscles soften. You sit for a moment and feel your shoulders unclench with the slow disbelief of someone who forgot their body could feel this good in winter. A soldier nearby rubs oil into his arms. Another takes a small metal tool, a strigil, and draws it along his skin to scrape away oil and sweat and grime. The motion is slow and practiced, not harsh, and you realize the bathhouse is not only about soaking. Romans often clean themselves by oiling and scraping, rather than using soap in the modern sense. It's a detail that feels oddly intimate and very real. The scrape of metal, the sheen of oil, the way cleanliness is achieved through routine rather than foam. You can hear the furnace's distant roar like an animal behind a wall, and you imagine the stoker, a man assigned to the fire, feeding it steadily, keeping the whole system alive. The bathhouse is a machine, but a gentle one, and it still demands constant attention. You move onward into hotter rooms, and the air thickens again. In the caldarium, the hot room, the steam wraps around you like a wet cloak. Your skin flushes. Your breath feels easier, then heavier. Water sits in basins, warm enough to make your fingers ache with pleasure when you dip them in. The sound of dripping is constant, rhythmic, like a clock made of water. This, too, is survival. Not because baths make you invincible, but because they restore you. The frontier grinds men down with cold, damp, and repetitive strain. A hot room loosens stiff joints. Warm water makes you feel human again. And in a place where discipline and endurance are daily requirements, even a small restoration becomes strategic. Some ancient writers praise baths as part of Roman civilization itself, a marker of order and refinement. Others moralize about baths as places of indulgence, arguing that too much comfort weakens virtue. On the frontiers, those arguments feel distant. Here, the bathhouse is not a decadent palace, it's a practical reprieve. Historians still argue, gently, about the health effects of Roman bathing, whether it truly improved hygiene in a modern sense, or whether crowded baths could also spread illness. Both possibilities exist. Warm water and routine cleaning likely helped in some ways, but communal spaces always carry risk. The frontier bathhouse, like so much else, is a blend of benefit and vulnerability. You watch men talk while they warm themselves. Conversations are quieter here, not because anyone is forbidden to speak, but because the steam makes everything feel softer. Someone mentions a patrol route. Someone complains about a centurion with a talent for assigning the coldest watch to the loudest men. Someone else laughs and says, in a tone that suggests this joke has traveled through many forts, that the centurion is simply conducting scientific experiments on human suffering. You smile, but you keep it gentle, letting it be the kind of amusement that doesn't wake you up. There's a moment when you step into the frigidarium, the cold room, and the contrast shocks you into bright awareness. The cold water is a clean slap, a reminder that your body is alive. Some men plunge quickly, others only splash their faces. In winter, the idea of cold water feels like madness, but it's part of the sequence. Hot, warm, cold, each step changing circulation, each step claimed to strengthen and refresh. You notice that even here, even in this cold space, the cold is controlled. It is not the endless frontier wind. It is a chosen cold, contained by stone walls and lamps, and the knowledge that warmth is only a doorway away. You step back out, and the tepidarium feels like mercy again. On the wall, you see an inscription, or a carved mark, simple, not grand evidence that people still leave traces of themselves even in utilitarian places. In some forts, stones carry the names of units, dedications, little stamps of identity. We were here. We built this. We keep it going. The bathhouse, in that sense, is also propaganda without speeches. Rome can bring warmth to the edge of the world, but you can also feel the limits of that claim. The bathhouse depends on fuel, and fuel depends on wood, and wood depends on labor, and labor depends on supply and discipline. If the supply lines fail, if the forest is stripped too far, if the fort's priorities shift in a crisis, the bathhouse could cool and fall quiet. Civilization, here, is not permanent marble. It is a fire that must be fed. You return to the changing room, skin warm and slightly damp, and pulling clothes back on feels different now. Wool against warm skin is a comfort. Boots are easier to tie when your fingers can bend. Even the act of pinning a cloak becomes less of a grim necessity and more like settling back into your role. As you step outside, the cold hits you again, but it doesn't feel quite as brutal. The bathhouse has given you a small reserve, like charging a lantern before walking into darkness. And in that darkness, you begin to sense the next layer of frontier life, waiting beyond warmth and food. The invisible machinery of pay, supply, and paperwork, those quiet forces that decide whether the bath stays hot, whether the bread stays plentiful, whether the boots get replaced before winter decides they won't. You step away from the bathhouse with warmth still clinging to you, and for a few minutes, the fort feels almost gentle, almost. Then you pass the headquarters building again, the Principia, and you remember, comfort here is never only about fire and wool. It is also about accounts. Winter survival has a second spine: paperwork, pay, and the long, quiet movement of supplies. Inside the Principia, the air smells different from barracks and kitchens. Less smoke, more wax and ink. The light is steadier, voices are lower. You hear the soft scrape of a stylus on wood, the faint tap of a seal being pressed. The empire, in this room, feels less like a sword and more like a ledger. You step into a corridor where an officer passes, cloak trimmed and better kept than most, boots cleaner. Behind him, a clerk carries a bundle of writing tablets or rolled documents. It's not glamorous, but you can almost see how the fort truly runs. Orders written, rations counted, work details assigned, pay issued, deductions tallied, supplies requested, supplies received, supplies missing. Roman soldiers are paid stipendium, though the details evolve over time. Emperors adjust pay rates. Some emperors become famous for increases, others for stinginess, and reforms ripple through the army. By the early empire, pay is a central part of recruitment and retention. But what a soldier gets is not always what he keeps. There are often deductions for food, clothing, equipment, and other necessities. How exactly this works can vary by period and unit, and historians still debate the precise mechanics and how it felt at the ground level. What is clear is that money flows in and out, and on the frontier, those flows can determine warmth, because pay is not only money, pay is access. With pay, you buy extra food from traders in the nearby settlement. You pay a cobbler for better boots or repairs when official issue is slow. You purchase a warmer cloak, a thicker underlayer, a small luxury like dried fruit, or a lamp with better oil. Pay is also a small psychological buffer, proof that hardship is part of a contract, not a trap. You watch men gather in a courtyard, not quite lined like a parade, but clustered with the expectant quiet of people waiting for something important. Payday is not constant. It comes in intervals, and delays can happen. When it arrives, the mood shifts. Jokes become lighter, complaints become more specific, because now they're about what you'll do with the money. A clerk sits at a table, guarded, with a box or bag that holds coin. Names are called, men step forward. A transaction occurs quick, controlled. An officer watches. There is no room for confusion here. Confusion breeds fights, and fights are expensive. This is the fort's calm ritual of trust. But winter adds strain to every system. The supply lines that feed this place stretch outward like roots. Roads repaired in summer, river routes used when they aren't frozen, storage depots that must be filled ahead of storms. When winter arrives early, carts bog down. When rivers freeze, barges stop. When snow blocks passes, the frontier becomes a little island of stone and need. So the fort relies on planning and on redundancy. Stores built up in autumn, contracts with local producers, requisitions from nearby towns, and the army's ability to redirect resources when necessary. Historians often describe the Roman state's logistical strength as one of its defining features, but they also note how vulnerable it can be to disruption: bad harvests, political instability, raids, corruption, or simply weather. And corruption is the shadow that always trails the ledger. You don't have to imagine melodramatic villains with dripping mustaches. Corruption can be as small as a supplier, delivering poor quality grain at full price. It can be an official skimming from rations. It can be a contractor bribing someone to overlook short measures. The Roman world knows this problem. Complaints and laws about fraud and corruption appear throughout Roman history. The army, by necessity, tries to control it with inspections, documentation, and hierarchy. But winter creates more opportunities for things to go missing, because everyone is tired, everyone is cold, and everyone wants more than the system can always provide. You walk past a storeroom where a soldier checks a seal on a container, then nods to another. You sense the quiet seriousness. Supplies are guarded not only from outsiders, but from the temptation inside. Hunger and cold make people creative, and not always in ways the rules approve of. This is another place where historians argue carefully. How widespread were shortages? How often did supply breakdowns happen? How Roman was the frontier in practice when reality interfered? The evidence suggests that many forts functioned remarkably well for long periods. Otherwise, the empire could not have held its borders as it did. But the evidence also hints at stress. Requests for goods, complaints in letters, the need for constant administrative attention. The frontier is not one smooth machine. It is a machine that needs constant repair. You think again of Vindolanda's letters, those thin wooden tablets that preserve everyday voices. They show not only personal longing, but also administrative texture. Lists, inventories, requests. That kind of writing is the fort's nervous system. Without it, the body stumbles. You step into a room where a map or schematic might be kept, a rough depiction of routes, forts, and supply points. You can't be sure exactly what hangs on every wall, and you refuse to invent a specific map you can't verify. But you can feel the planning mindset. The fort is never only thinking about today, it is thinking about the next storm, the next shipment, the next winter month when grain must be stretched, when wood must be rationed, when boots must be repaired rather than replaced. A soldier enters with a request, something small, perhaps, like a missing strap or a complaint about ration quality. He speaks briefly. A clerk responds without warmth or cruelty, simply with procedure. Winter has no patience for drama, and bureaucracy, in its own stern way, mirrors winter's indifference. Outside again, you see the practical consequences of pay and supply in the nearby civilian settlement beyond the fort walls. Even at night, a few lights flicker in houses and workshops. Traders thrive on the army's demand. A smith repairs a hinge, a cobbler patches boots, a brewer fills barrels. The fort is a customer as much as it is a fortress. This is another kind of survival, economic, and it makes the frontier feel less like a lonely outpost and more like a living region, a borderland where Roman soldiers and local people depend on each other, even when they distrust each other. Money flows, goods flow, rumors flow. Winter forces everyone into the same hard reality. You stand for a moment near the granary and watch a guard check the door, then move on. The guard's job is not glorious. It is cold, repetitive, and necessary. Without grain, the fort collapses. Without fuel, it freezes. Without pay, it frays. You feel the fort's winter survival now as a layered system. Clothing against skin, boots against ground, fire against night, food against hunger, water against thirst, and beneath all of it, administration against chaos. And as the night deepens into its most silent hours, you begin to sense the next test, waiting at the edge of the walls. Patrols, watches, the long darkness, and the disciplined art of staying alert when your body wants nothing more than to curl up near the embers and forget the frontier exists. Night on the frontier does not arrive like a curtain falling. It seeps in, it thickens, it settles into the spaces between buildings, into the cracks of stone, into the pauses between footsteps. The fort's lamps glow more clearly as the sky darkens, each flame a small, stubborn answer to the winter. You feel the pull of sleep warmth from the bathhouse still echoing in your muscles, bread and stew heavy in your stomach, but the fort cannot sleep all at once. The border is not guarded by wishful thinking. It is guarded by watches, patrols, and the quiet repetition of duty. You walk toward the rampart as the watch changes. A sentry steps down from his post, shoulders tight, face weathered by wind. Another steps up, cloak pinned, belt set, eyes squinting into darkness as if trying to see through time. The exchange is brief, a few words, a nod, a shared understanding. The night is long, and you do your part. Above you, the sky is hard and glittering. Stars look closer in winter, as if cold air sharpens them. Somewhere beyond the walls, trees creak, snow shifts, an animal moves in underbrush, making a sound that could be harmless or could be the first hint of something else. On a frontier, the line between harmless and dangerous is often made of attention. You climb the steps to the wall, walk, and feel the wind meet you again, direct and unfiltered. It slides under your cloak if you let it. It tests every seam. You tuck your chin and let your shoulders rise slightly. A human imitation of the fort's architecture. Make yourself smaller. Reduce exposure. Conserve heat. A patrol passes along the wall, moving at a steady pace. They are not sprinting. They are not swaggering. They are walking in the measured way of people who must keep moving to stay warm and to stay awake. The rhythm of their boots becomes a kind of lullaby. Crunch, thud, crunch. You see them pause to look outward into the darkness. There is no clear enemy in sight, no cinematic silhouettes. There is only landscape and uncertainty. And perhaps that is the hardest part of frontier duty. The enemy is often not a person, but possibility. Possibility of a raid, possibility of a misunderstanding, possibility of a storm that cuts you off, possibility of illness spreading through crowded rooms. You watch a man rub his hands, then press them briefly against his belly under his cloak to borrow warmth. Another shifts his weight from foot to foot, keeping blood moving. A third lifts his head and listens, really listens, because hearing carries in cold air. A snapped twig can seem louder than it is. A distant shout can feel closer. Winter magnifies sound and fear in the same way. You think of the Roman army's discipline and training, the way it drills men to respond to orders, to hold formation, to endure. Historians often credit that discipline as a key factor in Roman military success. Yet here, at night, discipline looks less like marching and more like not panicking when your imagination invents shapes in the dark. It looks like staying at your post when your fingers ache. It looks like trusting your comrades to patrol the stretch beyond your torchlight. The fort itself is designed to make watch easier. Walls create elevated sightlines. Towers break up the perimeter. Gates are controlled choke points, closed and barred at night. Ditches and obstacles outside the wall slow anyone approaching. On Hadrian's wall, for example, mile castles and turrets punctuate the line, creating a system of observation and control. Not every frontier looks exactly like that, but the principle repeats. Structure supports vigilance. Still, structure cannot replace the human mind. You follow a patrol down to the gate area. The gate is quiet, heavy with iron and wood. A guard stands near a brazier, not too close, just close enough to keep sensation in his hands. He checks the locking mechanisms with the casual seriousness of someone who knows that a gate is only as good as the habits of the people who secure it. From beyond the walls comes the faintest echo of movement, perhaps a trader late on the road, perhaps nothing at all. The guard doesn't shout. He doesn't dramatize. He listens. He waits. He consults another. They make a decision in low voices. The gate remains closed. That restraint is also part of survival. Winter turns mistakes into consequences faster. You pass by the barracks and hear the muffled sound of men sleeping, breathing, a cough, a muttered word in a dream. In warm seasons, a fort might feel louder at night. In winter, it feels cocooned, tucked inward. People conserve energy. They bundle themselves like stored grain. In one room, you see a lamp still lit. A soldier sits at a table, head bent over a writing tablet. The lamplight paints his fingers gold. He scratches a stylus across wood, slow and careful. Perhaps he writes a letter home, or to a friend. Perhaps he writes a list of things he needs. Socks, a warmer cloak, a small luxury. The exact content is unknown, and you refuse to invent words he didn't write. But you recognize the gesture. Writing is a way to reach warmth at a distance. To remember there is a world beyond the wall. You step back into the night. The patrol moves again, and you go with it, your body settling into the rhythm. A step, a pause, a glance, a listen. The wind whistles in the cracks between stones. You taste smoke in the air, and it comforts you because it means someone is still feeding the fires. Somewhere beyond the fort, on the frontier roads, other units do the same work in their own corners of the empire. Along the Rhine, watchfires reflect on dark water. Along the Danube, men listen to ice. In Britain, the moorland wind tries to pry into every door. Different landscapes, same human task, to keep the line and to keep yourself intact. You notice how the night changes your perception of time. Minutes stretch. Your mind begins to invent stories to fill the quiet. You think of home, wherever home is for you, in this imagined life. Warmer rooms, familiar voices. You think of Rome, distant and glowing in the imagination, like a city that might as well be a myth from here. The empire feels enormous at night, and you feel small inside it. And yet, you also feel connected. The fort is a community of shared endurance. The patrol is a thread binding you to other men. Even the cold is shared, and sharing makes it less sharp. Historians still debate how frontier soldiers experienced this life emotionally, whether they felt pride in holding the border, whether they felt trapped, whether they grew attached to the provinces where they served. The evidence is mixed. Official inscriptions speak the language of honor. Private letters, when they survive, sound more like ordinary people missing family, complaining about supplies, joking about weather. It's likely that experiences varied widely. Some men found purpose, some found loneliness, most found both, depending on the day. The patrol reaches a tower, and you climb its steps. From the top, the landscape is a dark quilt. The fort's interior lamps make a small constellation below. Beyond the wall, nothing moves visibly. The world feels paused, held in winter's hand. You stand there and listen to your own breath. In that quiet, you realize another truth. Watch duty is not only about outsiders, it is also about keeping the fort's own routines safe. Fires must be monitored. Stores must be guarded. Drunkenness must be discouraged. Quarrels must be contained. Winter can make tempers shorter, and the fort cannot afford internal fractures. So, the watch is both outward and inward, a steady presence that says, we are still organized, we are still here. Eventually, the patrol turns back toward warmer corridors. Your toes are beginning to complain again. Your shoulders ache from holding against the wind. You feel your eyelids heavy, and you understand why winter survival is a balance of discipline and rest. You cannot stay sharp forever. As you step down from the wall walk, you sense the next theme waiting in the shadows beyond the gates, neighbors, traders, local communities, and the way frontier survival depends not only on Roman systems, but on relationships with the people who live in these cold lands too. You leave the ramparts behind, and the wind falls away again, as if someone has closed a heavy door on the night. Your shoulders relax a fraction, your ears stop straining, and in that quieter space, another truth becomes clearer. One that's been there all along, woven through every loaf, every barrel, every repaired boot. The fort is not alone. Beyond the walls, in the dark, there are people, not just enemies on a map, not just silhouettes in Roman stories, but neighbors, farmers, traders, craftspeople, families living their own winters in the same cold landscape. Some are subjects of Rome, some are allies, some are outsiders, many are simply local. And in a frontier world, local is often the most powerful identity of all. You walk out through the gate in daylight, because not everything on the frontier happens at night, and you follow a path that leads to a settlement clustered near the fort. The Romans often call these civilian communities vici, and archaeologists find them around many forts. Rows of buildings, workshops, small shrines, taverns, places where the soldier's world meets the civilian world and blurs at the edges. Here, the air smells different. Less official smoke, more mixed life. Cooking, animals, damp earth, wood shavings, the sweet-sour scent of brewing. You hear voices not arranged by command, children's laughter, a dog barking, a hammer striking metal. The fort is discipline, the settlement is improvisation, and yet, the two depend on each other. A soldier steps into a cobbler's shop. The cobbler's hands are stained with tannin and grease. He works quickly, because winter punishes delays. He patches a boot, reinforces a seam, replaces a hobnail. Money changes hands. The soldier leaves a little more prepared for patrol. The cobbler leaves a little more able to buy grain. It is an ordinary transaction, but in winter, ordinary transactions are survival. You pass a stall where someone sells food, perhaps extra bread, perhaps preserved items, perhaps something seasonal that can endure. It's hard to say exactly what every stall holds without inventing, so you let the scene remain general but true. There is trade, and it fills gaps that the official ration system cannot always fill. Soldiers spend pay in the vicus, and the vicus grows because soldiers spend pay. You also notice women moving through this space, and you remember another frontier reality: soldiers and families. For much of the early empire, Roman soldiers are officially discouraged or even legally restricted from formal marriage during service, depending on period and status. Yet relationships happen anyway. People live together, children are born. When discharge comes, veterans often settle nearby, and some emperors later formalize or adjust policies. Historians debate the exact lived impact of these restrictions and how strictly they were enforced in different places. What is clear is that frontier communities become mixed. Soldiers, veterans, partners, children, merchants, local people drawn into the fort's orbit. Winter intensifies those ties. When storms come, you need neighbors. When fuel runs low, you need trade. When illness spreads, you need help. The boundary between military and civilian becomes porous, like breath fogging the air between faces. You pause near a small shrine because people bring gods to the frontier too. Some worship the familiar Roman pantheon. Some adopt local deities. Some blend them, creating new names and dedications that reflect the borderland's mixed culture. On Hadrian's Wall and other frontier sites, inscriptions show a rich variety of cults and dedications: Jupiter, Mars, local spirits, and those mystery cults that traveled with soldiers across the empire. Mithras, for example, is strongly associated with the Roman military in many provinces, and Mithraea, small underground-like shrines, have been found near forts in places like Britain and along the Rhine. It's not that every soldier is a follower, but the presence of such cult sites shows how spiritual life threads through frontier existence. You don't linger too long, because this is still a bedtime journey, and the goal is calm, not doctrine. But the shrine reminds you, winter survival is not only practical, it is also emotional. People seek meaning when the world feels harsh. A trader calls out softly, offering goods. A soldier bargains, not aggressively, but with that half-playful seriousness people use when money matters. There's a rhythm to this exchange too, like the rhythm of the patrol. Ask, counter, agree, laugh, move on. And then you notice something subtler. Tension. Not loud, not violent, just a careful watchfulness in some eyes. Frontier relationships are not purely friendly. The fort represents power, taxes and requisitions can bite. The presence of soldiers can be protective and burdensome at once. Local communities might benefit from trade, but they might also resent demands for wood, grain, or labor. Rome's borderlands are places of negotiation, and winter raises the stakes. Historians still argue about how often frontier zones were truly peaceful in the Pax Romana sense. Some emphasize long periods of relative stability, with trade and cultural exchange thriving. Others point to recurring raids, local resistance, and the simmering friction that can flare when political conditions shift. Both views can coexist, because peace on a frontier is rarely absolute. It is a state maintained, not a state guaranteed. You step into a tavern-like space again, without inventing specific signage or names, and feel the warmth and smell of drink. Soldiers and civilians sit in the same room, cups in hand. Conversation flows around you like water around stones. Stories of weather, of prices, of a cart stuck in mud, of a cousin's illness, of rumors from the south. Rumors are frontier currency. In winter, when roads slow, rumors travel faster than facts. A trader says he heard something about an emperor. A veteran claims the fort downriver is short of grain. Someone insists the river ice is thick enough to walk across. Someone else calls him a fool. The room laughs, but not too loudly, because winter makes people careful, even when they're joking. You listen, and you realize this is another layer of survival. Information. The fort needs to know what's happening beyond its walls. The vicus is a source of eyes and ears. Traders move between communities. Locals know the land. They know where the river freezes first, where the forest paths stay passable, where wolves or bandits have been seen. Rome may build walls, but it still relies on local knowledge. You imagine auxiliary soldiers recruited from local or regional populations, sharing their understanding of weather and terrain with comrades from far away. The Roman army's diversity becomes an advantage here. Someone who grew up in colder climates teaches someone from a warmer province how to wrap feet properly, how to recognize dangerous ice, how to read the sky's color before a storm. The empire's mixture becomes a kind of winter schooling. You walk back toward the fort as the day fades again, the settlement's noises softening behind you. The walls rise ahead, steady and familiar, and you feel how the fort's survival is braided with the people outside it through trade, relationships, shared vulnerability, and sometimes uneasy compromise. At the gate, a guard nods you through. Inside, the fort's order returns. Straight roads, controlled spaces, routines waiting like laid-out tools. But you carry the settlement with you now: the smell of brewing, the hammer on metal, the quiet shrine, the murmured rumors. You carry the sense that even in the coldest places, life insists on growing around power. And as the next storm clouds gather on the horizon, because on the frontier, storms always gather, you begin to feel the narrative turning toward winter's hardest lessons. sickness, injury, and the limit of grit when the cold stops being merely uncomfortable and becomes truly dangerous. The storm arrives the way winter storms often do, not with a trumpet blast, but with a slow rearranging of the world. First, the sky loses its color. Then the wind changes direction and grows steadier, less playful, more determined. Snow begins as a few light grains that vanish when they touch your cloak, and then it thickens into a curtain. Sounds soften, distances shrink. The fort, which usually feels like a confident geometry of walls and streets, begins to feel like a ship at sea, everything outside it turning into white motion. You stand beneath the eaves of a building and watch men move faster now, not in panic, but in the brisk, practiced way of people who have seen this before. Doors are checked, shutters are latched. A wood detail doubles its pace, hauling extra fuel into sheltered stacks. Someone carries sacks toward the granary, shoulders bowed under weight. Another clears a path where snow has drifted into a corner that could become an icy trap later. In the storm's first hour, the fort feels competent. In the third hour, it feels tested. In the fifth hour, you begin to see what winter truly attacks. Not walls, but bodies. The cold is patient. It doesn't need to break down a gate. It only needs to find the small weak points: wet cloth that won't dry, a cough that won't leave, a blister that turns angry, a belly that can't keep food down. Winter is a slow pressure that turns minor discomfort into real danger if the routines slip. You move through the barracks and notice the small signs. A man sits with his back to the wall, cloak wrapped tight, eyes unfocused, not sleeping, not fully awake, simply conserving. Another breathes through his mouth, and you hear a rasp at the end of each inhale. Someone coughs again and again, trying to make it sound casual. Someone else is quieter than usual, which can be its own kind of alarm. On a frozen frontier, sickness doesn't announce itself politely. It spreads through shared rooms, shared tools, shared air. And Roman forts are, by design, communal. That closeness keeps you warm, but it also means that one person's fever becomes everyone's worry. You follow a corridor toward the fort's medical space, because many forts, especially larger ones, appear to have had some form of hospital building, often called a valetudinarium by modern historians. The archaeological footprints are suggestive: a planned building with small rooms off a corridor, spaces that look suited to separating the unwell from the healthy, near the fort's center where access is easier. Not every fort preserves clear evidence, and scholars debate how standardized these facilities were and how they evolved. But the broader picture is accepted. The Roman army invests in medical care because healthy soldiers are an asset, and winter makes health fragile. Inside, the air is warmer than outside, but not lush like the bathhouse. It smells of boiled cloth, oil, and old herbs. The lighting is soft, the sounds are hushed. You hear the quiet clink of a bowl, the murmur of a voice speaking low, reassuring, not dramatic. A medicus, an army medical practitioner, moves with unhurried focus. Roman medicine is a mix of observation, tradition, and theories that modern science doesn't fully share. They do not know bacteria, but they do know patterns: wounds that fester, fevers that surge, coughs that spread through close quarters. They know that clean water matters. They know that rest and warmth matter. They know that some injuries heal better when protected. The details of treatment vary, and it would be easy to invent specifics here. So you stay close to what is solid. Care exists, and it is practical. A soldier sits on a bench, boot off, foot held out. The skin is pale and angry in places, the heel cracked, the toes rubbed raw. It isn't cinematic, it's mundane, and that mundanity is exactly what makes it dangerous. The medicus cleans the area, wraps it, and the soldier's shoulders drop a fraction, grateful for any relief. Foot problems can take a man off patrol faster than a blade. On icy ground, your feet are your duty. In another room, someone lies under a blanket, cheeks flushed, eyes half closed. A fever, perhaps, maybe from infection, maybe from something caught in cold, damp air. Someone nearby offers warm drink water, posca, something gentle and controlled. The patient sips slowly. You feel the quiet fear everyone carries. Illness can be more unpredictable than the weather. And outside this fort, in the wider empire, there are larger waves of sickness that historians remember as turning points. In the later 2nd century, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, a pandemic event, often called the Antonine Plague, beginning around the 162nd CE, spreads through Roman territories and affects armies and cities alike. Ancient descriptions are imperfect, and scholars debate the exact disease. Many modern historians suspect smallpox, but certainty is difficult. What matters in this moment is the awareness. Even Rome's vast systems cannot always contain illness. Winter, with its crowded rooms and strained supplies, can make outbreaks feel sharper. You don't linger on the darkest possibilities. This is a bedtime story, and the point is not dread. The point is the fort's compassion and practicality under pressure. You watch as order asserts itself again through small acts. Bedding is aired when possible. Clothes are kept as dry as they can be. The sick are separated when there is space. Fires are maintained. Warm drinks are offered. Work details shift so the unwell can rest without shame. Discipline, here, becomes care. The group makes room for weakness because everyone understands they will be weak someday too. Still, winter finds its openings. A man slips on a patch of ice near the granary and lands hard. The sound is a dull thud that makes heads turn. He sits, stunned, then tries to stand and winces. A twist, perhaps, or a bruised joint. 2 others help him up without fuss. No jokes, not yet. In winter, even small falls can have consequences. A sprain limits patrol. A limited patrol invites risk. The fort is a web, and the cold plucks its threads. You walk past the bathhouse and feel the irony of it. A place built for health can also be a place where germs travel, simply because people gather there. Historians still argue about how hygienic Roman bathing truly was in practice. The baths certainly encourage cleaning, but communal spaces can spread illness too. The frontier soldier lives inside these trade-offs constantly. Closeness warms you and sickens you. Comfort restores you and risks you. Routine protects you and sometimes traps you. As the storm continues, the fort's mood shifts, not to despair, but to inwardness. People speak less. They move more carefully. The laughter in the barracks becomes quieter, more deliberate, like a lamp turned down to save oil. Someone begins telling a story soft, familiar, meant to pass time. Someone else mends a tear in a cloak with extra attention, because a tear in a storm is a problem you don't want tomorrow. You feel the psychological side of winter now, the way it can shrink a person's world until it becomes only the next meal, the next watch, the next warm corner. Some scholars suggest that this narrowing, this forced focus on routine, can strengthen group cohesion and discipline. Others point out that it can also heighten irritability and homesickness, especially among men stationed far from familiar climates. Both possibilities sit side by side in the same room. A person can be resilient and miserable at the same time. When the wind finally eases, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the fort being granted permission to breathe again. The next morning, snow lies in clean drifts against the walls. The world looks almost peaceful, like a fresh sheet pulled tight. But you can see the costs. Extra wood burned, extra labor spent, a few men limping, a few coughing, a few eyes heavy with poor sleep. And yet the fort stands. The routines hold. The fires are lit. Bread is baked. The sick are tended. The watch is posted. You step onto a cleared path and hear the crunch beneath your boots, familiar now, almost comforting. Above, the sky is pale and calm. Beyond the walls, the frontier stretches on, silent, waiting. And as you look outward, you sense the story turning again, away from individual storms and toward the longer sweep of history, where borders themselves shift, walls are built and abandoned, and emperors decide, far away, what the frontier will mean next. The morning after the storm feels almost tender, as if the world is trying to apologize for what it did in the night. Snow sits in rounded drifts. Smoke rises straight again. The fort's paths are scraped clear, and men move along them with the careful confidence of people who have learned that winter is never over, only temporarily quiet. But when you look out past the walls, you feel something bigger than weather shifting, something that has nothing to do with wind direction and everything to do with power. Borders move, not like a river, steadily, but like a mind changing its decision. One emperor decides a line should be here, another decides it should be there. A fort that feels permanent can become a waypoint, then a memory, then an empty shell holding snow. A road that once carried endless carts can fall quiet, and through it all, the soldiers remain, living inside decisions made far away. You walk along the fort's main street and picture the larger frontier, as if the ground itself is a scroll being unrolled and re-rolled. In Britain, the most recognizable anchor in this story is Hadrian's wall, begun around AD 122 under Emperor Hadrian, stretching from the Tyne to the Solway, stone in the east, turf in the west in its earlier phases, with forts, mile castles, and turrets stitched along it like fastenings. It is an enormous project, not only in labour, but in intent. A boundary made visible, not a perfect seal, no wall truly is, but a line that channels movement, controls crossings, and says, quietly, this is the edge we choose. You can almost feel Hadrian's mindset in the fort's routines. Hadrian is remembered for travel and consolidation, for strengthening frontiers rather than chasing limitless expansion. Historians still debate exactly how defensive the wall was meant to be, whether it was primarily a military barrier, a customs and immigration control, a symbol of power, or all of these at once. The evidence suggests it served multiple roles: a physical obstacle, a surveillance system, and a psychological statement. Winter does the same thing. It is physical, practical, and psychological all at once. But the frontier does not remain fixed, even when you build it in stone. A generation after Hadrian, under Antoninus Pius, Rome pushes north again and builds another barrier, the Antonine Wall, begun around AD 142, running across the narrow waste of Scotland. It is shorter than Hadrian's Wall and largely built of turf on a stone foundation, with forts and smaller installations along it. In the mind's eye, it looks softer than stone, but turf walls can be formidable when maintained, and they require maintenance, constant attention, the same way your winter fires do. You imagine what it feels like for soldiers when that decision arrives. A new line means new forts to build, new supply routes to establish, new forests to cut, new local relationships to negotiate, new winters to learn. The men don't argue with the map, they live inside it. A fort like the one you stand in might become a rear position, a supply point, a training base, or it might be reinforced, or it might be partly emptied. The daily rhythm changes different patrol routes, different watch priorities, different pressures on stores. Then, after a time within decades, Rome withdraws again to Hadrian's Wall. The reasons are still discussed by historians. The Antonine line may have been hard to hold, supply may have been more difficult. Local resistance or strategic recalculation may have played a role, and emperor's priorities shift with politics elsewhere in the empire. There's no single clean explanation that satisfies every scholar, because frontiers are complex and evidence is uneven. But the lived truth for a soldier is simple. You are told to move, and you move. You stand in the fort and feel that as a kind of emotional weather. Imagine living years on one line, knowing the wind patterns, the nearest springs, the best wood sources, the way snow drifts against certain walls, and then being ordered to uproot. You carry your cloak, your boots, your habits, but you cannot carry the exact shelter you've built out of familiarity. Winter is personal like that. It makes you bond with places, not because you love them, but because you have survived them. When Rome shifts the frontier, the infrastructure follows. Roads are improved or neglected. Granaries fill or empty. Bathhouses are heated or left cold. An abandoned bathhouse is a particularly strange thought. Tile pillars under a floor still standing, but no furnace roar, no steam, only cold air settling into the rooms where bodies once warmed. The hypercaust becomes a hollow, silent belly. You walk near the fort's stores and imagine an official seal being broken for the last time in a place that will soon be quiet. Grain removed, barrels rolled away, tools collected, nails pried out of woodwork because iron is valuable and you don't waste it when you march. Even the smallest objects feel different under that kind of change. A repaired boot is still useful, but now it must travel. A cloak must endure not just cold nights, but cold miles. The fort's winter routine becomes mobile again. Firewood gathered on the move, shelter improvised, water sources uncertain, the disciplined art of staying warm without walls. And Britain is only one theatre. Along the Rhine and Danube, the great river frontiers of the empire, the line is not a single wall like in Britain, but a network of forts, watchtowers, roads, river patrols, and boundary zones, often grouped under the idea of the limes. In some regions, there are palisades, ditches, earthen ramparts. In others, the river itself is the boundary and the highway at once. Winter there has its own character. Fog that turns the world ghostly. Ice that changes a river from barrier to bridge. Storms that make crossings risky for both sides. You picture a Roman watchtower along the river, a small fire glowing inside, a soldier listening to the ice creak. Here, the frontier's movement might not be a wall built and abandoned, but a fort rebuilt, a road rerouted, a garrison reinforced, a treaty made, a local alliance shifted. The map changes in quieter ways, but it still changes. And then, in the early 3rd century, another anchor drifts into your thoughts. The campaigns of Septimius Severus in Britain, around AD 208-211, when the emperor travels north with the army. Even if you are not living in that exact year, the memory of such movements hangs over frontier life like a lesson. Sometimes the emperor comes and everything tightens. Sometimes he leaves and you are left holding the weather again. Severus dies at York, Iberacum, in AD 211, and later writers remember those northern campaigns as harsh. Winter does not care who you are, and perhaps that is why emperors sometimes seek glory at frontiers. They are places where hardship looks like virtue from a distance. Historians argue about what these frontier shifts say about Rome itself. Some see them as evidence of strategic flexibility. The empire can advance, withdraw, and reconfigure according to changing needs. Others see them as evidence of limits, that Rome's resources, manpower, and political focus could not hold every line at maximum reach indefinitely. Both interpretations can be true, depending on the moment you're looking at. An empire can be strong and still have edges that ache. You feel this debate not as an academic question, but as a lived sensation. The feeling of being part of something vast that still cannot control everything. A soldier comes past you carrying a bundle of repaired gear. He looks ordinary, yet he is a hinge between decisions and reality. If the frontier moves, he moves. If the wall is reinforced, he builds. If a fort is abandoned, he strips it of useful parts and marches away. His winter survival skills remain constant, layering wool, tending boots, guarding water, rationing fire, while the political geometry changes around him. You walk again to the fort's edge and look outward. The snow makes the world look clean, but you know how quickly it becomes mud when it melts. You think of the Antonine Wall's turf and how it must have looked after repeated winters, needing repairs, sagging in places, demanding labor the way hunger demands bread. Stone feels more permanent, yet even stone walls crumble without care. Rome's borders, like Rome's fires, only last as long as someone feeds them. And that is the quiet heart of this section. Frontiers are not just lines, they are systems of attention. They require roads that stay passable, granaries that stay stocked, relationships that stay negotiated, routines that stay practiced, watchmen who stay awake. Winter is part of that system, an annual test that never stops arriving. When emperors shift the frontier, they are also shifting where winter will bite, where wood will be hauled, where boots will be mended, where bathhouse furnaces will roar or fall silent. You turn back toward the fort, and you feel the weight of all those years, Hadrian's consolidation, Antoninus Pius' northern push, the retreat, the later campaigns settling like layers of cloth. The landscape holds them in a quiet way. Stones reused, ditches softened, roads still faintly visible beneath snow, and you begin to sense the story approaching its final stretch, where the frontier's daily life dissolves into longer memory ruins, archaeology, and the way we know these winters at all, through scraps of wood tablets, worn hobnails, and walls that still stand in the cold air, whispering that people once lived here and learned, stubbornly, how to endure. You stand near the fort's edge and let your eyes rest on the landscape, the way you rest your hands near a fire, slowly, gratefully, with the feeling that you've earned a pause. The snow has begun to lose its perfect whiteness. A few days of boots and carts have bruised it into grey paths. In sheltered corners, it still looks untouched. But everywhere else, winter is already doing what it always does, turning beauty into work. Inside the walls, the routines continue: bread baked, fires tended, boots checked, watches posted, yet you can sense a subtle thinning, as if a great invisible rope has begun to slacken. Not today, not all at once, but over years, over decades. The Empire's attention shifts in ways that even a soldier can feel without being told. Orders become less predictable, supplies arrive later, repairs are made, but not as confidently. The fort still stands, still functions, yet the feeling of permanence begins to soften around the edges. You walk the main street and notice small signs of change: reused materials, patches instead of replacements, an officer talking longer than usual with a clerk, as if trying to make numbers behave. On the frontier, you learn to read these small signals the way you read the sky before a storm. The wider Roman world is changing too. By the late 3rd and 4th centuries, the empire faces repeated pressures: political instability, economic strain, border conflicts that flare in different places at different times. The frontier is never the only problem. It is simply the place where problems become physical. A shortage becomes fewer loaves. A delayed shipment becomes colder nights. A staffing issue becomes longer watches. Somewhere in the late Roman period, names like legion and auxiliary begin to share the stage with other organizational patterns, and the army itself evolves. Historians still debate how these changes felt at ground level, whether frontier soldiers felt more stretched or merely differently managed. But one thing is widely accepted: the later empire has to do more with the same winter. You climb the rampart again, and the view is familiar: the fort's lamps below, the dark countryside beyond. But now you imagine the frontier not as a single solid line, but as a fabric with threads being pulled in different directions. Britain, for example, is far from the central Mediterranean heart, and when crises demand troops elsewhere, far provinces can feel that shift. By the early 5th century, Roman rule in Britain is breaking apart. The details are complex, and historians argue about timing and causation, whether there is a clean end date or a long unspooling of authority. A famous reference often connected to this moment is the so-called Rescript of Honorius, dated to around AD 410, where later sources describe Romans telling the cities of Britain to look to their own defense. Scholars debate exactly what was meant, and even the context of the message, but the broad reality remains. Roman central authority in Britain collapses, and garrisons cannot rely on the old systems forever. You let that settle like snow on a cloak. Soft at first, then weighty. What happens to a frontier fort when the empire's hand loosens? Not an instant ruin, not a dramatic final trumpet. More often, a slow repurposing. Some soldiers may leave with units reassigned. Some veterans may stay, tied to local families, farms, and habits that have become their real lives. A bathhouse cools, the granary empties, the Principia's paperwork stops being updated with imperial confidence. Roofs leak, repairs become local rather than official. The fort becomes less Rome and more place. In the late Roman world, documents like the Notitia Dignitatum, a listing of offices and military units, suggest how the frontier is organized near the end of Roman administration, with figures such as the Dux Britanniarum associated with northern Britain's military command. It's a fragile kind of evidence, copied, preserved, debated, but it hints at a frontier still structured, still named, still trying to function even as the larger world changes around it. And when those structures fade, the stone remains. You walk outside the fort and imagine what happens after the fires stop being fed. Snow gathers inside empty rooms. Wind finds new paths through unlatched doors. Grass grows in the cracks of roads that once carried carts of wood and grain. Iron rusts. Leather disappears. But the things you touched, the hobnails, the stonework, the tiles of a hypocaust, the outline of a barrack block, linger longer than anyone expects. And then, in time, other people come. They do not arrive as the future, not to you. They arrive as neighbors of another century, living their own winters, needing their own warmth. Stone is valuable. Timber is valuable. A wall that once drew a border becomes a quarry for villages and farmhouses. This is not malice. It is necessity. Winter does not care whose empire built the stone. Winter cares only that the roof doesn't leak. You can picture it. A later hand, lifting a Roman block, fitting it into a new wall, using old strength for new survival. The frontier, in that sense, never truly ends. It changes owners, it changes languages, it changes prayers, but the cold remains, and people keep making shelters against it. Centuries later still, the frontier becomes something else again. Memory. Antiquarians begin to take interest in old stones. Travelers walk along the line of Hadrian's wall and wonder aloud, who lived here and why? Archaeologists dig, carefully, in places like Vindolanda, where waterlogged soil has preserved the fragile wood tablets, with handwriting, leather shoes, scraps of cloth, those intimate leftovers of people who wanted socks, who repaired boots, who stood watch in the dark. These discoveries don't bring Rome back, not really. They bring something quieter back, the texture of daily life. They remind you that history is not only emperors and campaigns, it is also a damp cloak drying by a hearth. It is a ledger of grain. It is a hand rubbing oil into leather. It is a soldier sharing warmth in a cramped room while the wind tries to pry the world apart. Historians still argue always with care about how to interpret Rome's frontier legacy. Was the empire a stabilizing force or an extractor of resources? Were frontier communities integrated or coerced? Did soldiers feel like colonizers? Or like tired workers doing a job? The answers shift by region, by era, by individual life. The frontier refuses simple moral endings. It gives you something more human, mixed motives, mixed outcomes, and the relentless presence of weather as an equalizer. You take one last walk along the imagined wall line, and you let the earlier images return softly, like sleepy callbacks in the mind. You remember that first winter wind against your cheeks, sharp as a whispering blade. You remember the bread smell in the bakery, warm as a promise. You remember the bathhouse steam, the floor heat rising under your soles like mercy. You remember the crunch of patrol boots at night, the way the stars looked closer in cold air. You remember barrels, salt, and the quiet confidence of supplies stacked against hunger. And you realize that how Roman soldiers survived on frozen frontiers is not a secret trick or a single heroic moment. It is a system of care disguised as discipline. 1,000 small attentions repeated until they become culture. Build the roof well, store the grain dry, keep the boots tended, share the fire, keep watch, trade with neighbors, mend what tears, warm what freezes, and keep going. The fort fades now, not as a collapse, but as a slow dimming of lamps one by one. The last ember settles into ash, the last list goes unupdated, the last watch is called in, and the cold moves into spaces that were once full of breath. And now, as promised, the story's weight can lie down. The centuries that carried hardship can rest. The storms that rattled shutters belong to the past. You are here, in your own present, wrapped in your own blankets, far from the fort's wind and the frontier's long nights. The candlelight in your mind grows softer, and the stone walls you imagined begin to blur at the edges, as if covered by drifting snow that asks nothing of you. You can let the sounds fade, the grind of the millstone, the crackle of the hearth, the distant call of a watch change until they become a gentle hush, like the sea heard from very far away. The road outside the fort empties. The last cart stands still. The last torch goes out without drama. Library shelves, real or imagined, close their spines in the dark. Old tablets, old stones, old nails rest in the quiet earth. No longer tools of survival, only patient witnesses. And you, safe in your own room, can release the cold that belonged to another age. Let the frontier's wind pass by you without touching you. Let the wall stand far away, under a calm sky. Let the centuries soften into a whisper, and as history closes its heavy books for the night, the quiet stars of another age watch over your dreams.